Okay, greetings. Allow me to welcome you to For the Love of Fiction, a podcast dedicated to discussing story and character across a wide range of mediums. I am your host, Gavin Groves, and with me is my co-host, Mark Tobit.
Hello, mate.
How you doing, mate?
I'm feeling pretty good.
Feeling good? What's happened?
Oh, nothing. It doesn't take much to keep me happy, man. I've just polished off a very nice beef madras, and one thing I'm finding is I'm actually making the night in which we film this my curry night of late.
Oh, really? Okay.
So I'm going into these things with a belly full of fire in more than one way. So,
well, unfortunately, my dinner tonight was extremely boring. I literally had chicken goujons and chips.
Sometimes the basics are the best.
Sometimes you just need to have some chicken goujons and some barbecue sauce.
I'm all about that. Although I'm a garlic mayo person myself. So.
Garlic mayo. I like garlic mayo a lot as well, actually. Yeah. But I don't know. Today, barbecue sauce was on the menu. This is the Final Fantasy VII Retrospective podcast episode. We are timing this episode, of course, with the release of the brand new Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. So, we're going to start with a little preamble, Mark. Why don't you tell me what you've been up to?
Not too much recently. I mean, I've been doing a lot of reading, and that's most of it. I mean, still a couple of movies on the list, but I'm not going to talk about them just yet. Main thing I've been doing is reading a lot more manhwa of late. I've been making my way through Webtoon.
What's this? Manhwa?
That's the Korean term for manga.
Oh, the Korean term. Okay.
Yeah. Cool. And been reading a lot of that. Webtoon makes it very easy to just utterly demolish entire series with no major effort. And one thing that's been happening of late is I've started to realise that there are universes, and I alluded to this in the past when I was talking about Lookism. One of the ones I'd started off, was one of the very first ones I read, and I spiralled off onto two other stories, Viral Hit and Manager Kim. And I thought, oh, that's nice. They made a spin-off universe. Yeah, that's all good. And then I started reading another comic recently called Questism, which maybe the fact that they both have isms in the title should have given me some sort of indicator. But it made no connection, no allusion to this. I read this comic and I got around about a good 60, 70 issues into it before then suddenly a major character from Lookism just suddenly walks through the door. And I was like, wait, what? This is the same universe. So I decided, I need to do some more research on this. And I discovered that a lot of the manhwa I've already read are actually comprised into different universes. And they actually have a lot of connections, which I'd totally gone over my head, apparently. Shows how observant I was being. But the three major ones that I've come across so far are the PTJ universe, which is the one which has Lookism and Questism. A second series I've been reading recently would be the Blue String universe, which covers Study Group to Not Die and Get Schooled. Now, Get Schooled is one that you probably have great difficulty in tracking down recently, seeing as it very majorly just got cancelled because of the use of racial slurs in the story. It was it was an incredible controversy. It was somewhat surprising, to be honest, that the writers were so tone deaf on that one. And another universe, Superstring, which has the likes of Terror Man and Jungle Juice. These names tell you almost nothing about these stories, but they are all very interesting stories for different reasons. Sometimes they're superhero-based, sometimes they're school-based with bullies and gangs and things. And I really don't understand why this sort of style of literature scratches an itch for me, but I can't get enough of it. So yeah, I'm going to endeavour to read more of these and report back if there's anything that I might recommend to yourself. What about yourself, man?
Well, I'd say not too much myself either. One little thing of note, which might be of interest to you, is Tekken 8. We had a little play around of that at the party we had not so long ago.
Yeah.
But what is potentially of interest for you is the story mode. I don't know if you paid attention to the story in Tekken 7, did you?
There's a story?
Yeah, long story short, Kazuya kills Heihachi. That's pretty much all you need.
Actually, I do remember something to that tone, yeah.
Yeah. And cinematic storytelling has become part of the requirement of modern day fighting games. Casual players and other players want a cinematic story. And basically Namco Bandai have absolutely tried to knock it out of the park with this one. And try to do a proper Mortal Kombat style cinematic story mode with lots of cutscenes, an attempt at telling a coherent story, I stress, and lots of fighting and whatever with an actual crescendo and stuff and arcs and stuff. And like, you know, I'm not going to spoil it because I think you should probably maybe watch it on YouTube or something at some point, or watch the one from 7 as well for some context. But
I will say I make light of previous about there not being of not paying attention to the story, but I will be honest, in all truthness, a lot of the previous games have given me a lot of laughs and also very interesting dramatic scenes in a lot of their cutscenes.
Yes. I mean, one thing that can be said about Tekken 7, Tekken as a franchise, let's say, with its narrative, is that it has been somewhat coherent in its overall. Like, characters have died and come back to life.
Oh, actually, specifically.
Kazuya specifically as well. Multiple characters have died and come back to life. Like, characters have turned good, characters have turned evil. Like, it's for the sake of the game, basically, whatever reasons the developers, producers have decided, you know, without really caring much about, you know, dramatic flow, let's say.
Yeah.
And this is like an attempt to sort of draw it all together and create a story that has some sense of like real dramatic flow. And it almost works. It almost works because, like, obviously in the previous game, Kazuya kills his father, Heihachi. They have like that ongoing feud, don't they? And then so the Mishimas that are left are Kazuya and Jin, his own son. And basically what this narrative tries to do is turn Jin into a character, a protagonist. Because he has been the protagonist of the franchise since Tekken 3, obviously, when he was introduced. And it gives him flaws and sort of gives him an arc and it gives him things to overcome. And while it is very much in an anime, let's say, Japanese, whatever, way, like, it almost works. I struggle with it personally because I don't know if you're aware of this, but in Tekken 6, Jin's a bad guy. And, like, he basically, like, ends up becoming the head of the Mishima Zaibatsu, and he ends up, like, killing lots of people. There's some bullshit story behind it that it's actually, no, he was good. It's like, no, this is just terrible writing. And, like, I'm still kind of not over that, really. And it took me a while for me to go, no, Jin, I don't feel sympathy to you whatsoever. But,
well, how many redemption arcs can a character go through?
You can't get a redemption arc for being the head of an evil corporation and killing millions of people. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I tripped and enslaved the country.
Like, no. It's just a massive no. But, like, it kind of works. It kind of works. And it's actually pretty good. It has a few twists and turns. I remember I told you that, like, Heihachi's got an illegitimate daughter now. And she's got a brother as well, Lars, as he's called as well from the previous games.
Is that, like, Lars? Like, is he the son of Heihachi as well?
Yes.
God damn,
because I know he was a busy man, but and there's kind of a narrative around that, but it's probably the least interesting aspect of it. Like,
so does that make Lars and this new girl uncle and auntie to Jin?
Correct. And, like, one thing I will say to you, like I said, is you kind of need to know the story of Tekken 6 to completely appreciate this. And Tekken 6 has got this monstrous entity called Azazel, I want to call it. It's a giant monster, basically. And what Tekken 8 does is it basically sort of gives you an origin of the devil gene and pushes the narrative behind the devil gene to its conclusion. And it's kind of okay. You know, there's a few bits I went, you know, some of it's quite tropey and cheesy, and I don't know. It just defies, like, logic most of the time. But, like, if you want to watch, like, Dragon Ball Z style cutscenes, like, with Tekken characters in them, like, there's a few pretty cool moments in it, especially when obviously Kazuya and Jin inevitably fight. And to say they fight is an understatement. You know, oh my god, it just goes on and on and on. But it's kind of interesting, you know. A lot of people online think it's like the best, like, cinematic story mode ever in a fighting game. I disagree completely. I think it's up there. I think that the writing, like, needs a lot of work a lot. And I think that like the script needed a lot of work. Whether that's translation or not, I don't know. It could be. It did have a lot of those awkward hallmarks. Like, you know how like in anime and Japanese culture, especially in anime, characters are thinking to themselves all the time and talking to themselves all the time. And it just gets fucking old, in my opinion. It's just needless, constant exposition of stuff that is obvious, you know. Yeah. It's tiring for me personally.
As we all know.
yeah. It is fine, though. It's part of the culture, you know. A lot of people are fine with that, and they're fine with that as well. But me personally, I just kind of wanted to put my little stamp on it. Is that, like, you know, I thought it was a valiant effort, let's say. And in the end, like, these are characters that yourself as well, we've lived with for, 30 years now? Since Tekken 1 in the arcades. I played Tekken 1 in the arcades, so...
Yeah, and I got in on Tekken 2, yeah.
Tekken 2 on PS2, was PS1, sorry. Yeah. Well, no, probably in the arcade as well, I don't know, but, like, I definitely first played Tekken in the arcades, and then on PS1, and then it just went around that. I can still remember seeing Tekken 2 for the first time. In Southend Arcade, actually. It was in one of the arcades closest to Pier Hill, and like it was next to where Aliens vs Predator was, the Capcom Aliens vs Predator, and it was like Yoshimitsu's stage, and it was mind blowing. Incredible graphics, but anyway. Talking about Tekken is very apt, I would say, for the overall theme of this episode, because we're talking about a video game from the 32-bit era, of course. And we shall be picking that up after a break. So we will be right back. Welcome back to the podcast. So, Mark, Final Fantasy as a series began in 1987 with the release of the first game in the series created by Hironobu Sakaguchi, hereby thou known as Sakaguchi. Sakaguchi had planned to make an RPG for his company, Squaresoft, obviously before the Square Enix merger, and was refused multiple times due to failures of his own games. With the release of Dragon Quest, the yin to Final Fantasy's yang, in the history of the Japanese RPG, the JRPG, and the success of Dragon Quest, Sakaguchi was at last given permission. So, do you know where the name Final Fantasy actually comes from, Mark?
No, never questioned that one, to be honest. Now I think about it, yeah.
So, like, the roots of Final Fantasy are in Dungeons and Dragons and the popular franchise Fighting Fantasy. And they were considering calling it Fighting Fantasy. But they decided to obviously not do that to avoid copyright. But because of the situation that Sakaguchi found himself in, with this game that he was working on after a series of failures, this game that he had begged to be made, that he was finally given permission to make. If this game failed, he would have been disgraced and actually forced to quit the industry.
So it was almost like his kind of
final
swan
chance.
song. Yeah.
It was his final chance.
So, yeah.
That's why he called it the Final Fantasy.
Which became somewhat of an ironic term, I think, the longer the series has run, really, hasn't it? So... Absolutely.
So, yes, it is part of the JRPG genre. The combat in this game is turn-based, heavily influenced by Dungeons and Dragons, you know, with stats, attack, defense, you know, creatures being of certain elements, weak against certain elements. In terms of setting, often the worlds of these, especially the early games, were set in fantasy, sword and sorcery style social worlds. The very, very first Final Fantasy, especially if you look at it now on its original console, the NES, in 1987, it's incredibly simplistic in terms of graphics, obviously, of story and its mechanics. But I've said this already about some things, and I'll probably say it again. There's a certain elegance to it. When I first played it on the Game Boy Advance compilation, Final Fantasy Dawn of Souls, which improved the graphics. But anyway, as history would tell, this Final Fantasy would be incredibly successful, and the series as a whole would become synonymous with Nintendo, with the next 2 iterations being released on the NES, and then, of course, 4, 5, and 6 being released on the Super Nintendo. I believe there were offshoots released on the Game Boy as well. Crystal Quest, I want to say. Interestingly enough, Mark, as we will mention soon, we didn't know much about Final Fantasy as kids because they were never released in this country, were they? In the UK.
I didn't have a fucking clue about Final Fantasy prior to playing this one.
It actually turns out that one of these Final Fantasy games, these offshoot Final Fantasy games on the Game Boy, was released in this country. And I've read over the years that it was believed that these JRPGs were not released over here because the Japanese thought we didn't care, we didn't understand them, we wouldn't understand them, we wouldn't care. The Americans got more than us, that's for sure. I know that Final Fantasy VI... So Final Fantasy 1 and 2 were released in America, and then they didn't release 4 and 5. And then when they released 6 in America, they renamed 6 as Final Fantasy 3. To try and avoid confusion. Which is kind of strange, isn't it?
Yeah.
But I actually remember just recently going through an issue of Games Master from the early 90s, and I found a stub of a review of one of these Final Fantasy games on Game Boy. And it got slated for being less interesting, more simplistic, and more boring than another RPG, which was very famous at the time, The Legend of Zelda. Now, as we know, Legend of Zelda is an action game, isn't it? It's not turn-based. Yeah. And at the time, the UK press believed that turn-based RPGs were boring, I imagine. I mean, nowadays, Dungeons and Dragons is not as nerdy as it once was, probably thanks to Stranger Things. But I imagine in the 90s, it was incredibly nerdy. You used to play D&D, didn't you, when you was a kid?
I was more 40k myself, to be honest, but still turn-based, so...
I suppose so, yeah. I suppose so. I swear you told me you played D&D as a kid. Maybe I'm going mad.
I think I dabbled once or twice, but not on the same level. I mean, I had the miniatures for 40k and stuff. That was the stuff I got.
40k, yeah. I love 40k. But, getting on to Final Fantasy VI. Final Fantasy VI would prove to be a pivotal game in the direction of the series overall, because it would be the first time the series moved away from the archetypical swords and sorcery fantasy setting. And it actually included elements of science fiction and steampunk. Actually included mechs and dystopian cities. Which is interesting, really, isn't it? I'm a big fan of 6. It might be my favourite one of them all. But I can say that the plots of these games definitely got more complex as time went on. Like Final Fantasy IV would probably be the earliest one where you could say the protagonist was flawed with enough conflict to make them interesting. And Final Fantasy VI had multiple characters who were interesting and an incredibly interesting villain. And some great dramatic turns, actually, thinking about it. But I would probably say that maybe 6, but none of the others really come close to the level of storytelling that we get in 7. This is a far more complex game than any of the games that came before. So, regarding the development of Final Fantasy VII, as with 6, Sakaguchi, the creator of Final Fantasy, sort of stepped back from his director role and became producer and allowed the younger generation to sort of have more control over these games, because it is believed in many of these Japanese companies that the best CEOs, let's say, will nurture the young. Because obviously the old can't be around forever, and for the company to continue, someone has to take it over. But yes, Final Fantasy VII, Mark, I don't know if you know this, was originally in development for the Super Nintendo.
I think I heard something about this. Was it originally some sort of disc expansion on the Super Nintendo? Am I thinking that right?
There was a SNES disc expansion, that's correct, which that actually was born from Nintendo forging or attempting to forge a partnership with Sony.
And then the PlayStation was the result of that, wasn't it?
That's correct. Basically, Nintendo created the monster, so to speak. They are their own Frankenstein.
And they continued to bite them on the arse a year or two later.
Well, for a few years, the Switch has become like one of the most successful consoles of all time, so they sort of caught up, I suppose you could say. But anyway, so yes, basically, Final Fantasy VII was originally in development for the Super Nintendo, but the production and development of the game was delayed due to Chrono Trigger, which is another seminal SNES JRPG. So once that game was completed and finished and released, when returning to Final Fantasy VII, what is interesting about Final Fantasy VII is that the development period, the planning period, sort of occurred during the transitional period between 16-bit and 32-bit video games, which is an exciting time, wasn't it?
Oh yeah, games were just exploding and expanding with FMVs and music and all manner of sort of like atmosphere was being added to games that previously wasn't there.
There was the generation of failed 32-bit consoles that we know about, such as the Jaguar, the Atari Jaguar, the 3DO, the Philips CDI, and
I've played them all, and yeah,
they're all pretty bad.
Yes,
but when developers, companies developing consoles, they're planning years in advance, and at this point, Nintendo was already going to continue with using, cartridges instead of embracing the CD-ROM. And this is what started the problems between Nintendo and Squaresoft at the time. I found out today, actually, when researching this, that apparently Square even considered the Sega Saturn as a release for Final Fantasy VII, which, I can't even imagine that. That's insane.
That would have changed things significantly across.
Or maybe it wouldn't have been a hit. Who knows?
Yeah.
What?
The Saturn didn't sell as well as the PlayStation. So
not in the West. It didn't sell as well as the PlayStation in Japan, but it sold well in Japan. So yeah, basically, like Square considered using the Nintendo 64 disk drive that was planned, the 64DD, which were like floppy disks, so to speak, but Nintendo made. And they had more storage space and more accessibility than the actual cartridge for the N64, but apparently, according to Square, the discs were not big enough, and it would have taken 30 of them to house what they imagined to be Final Fantasy VII. I kind of feel that's embellishment a little bit. Like, Ocarina of Time is a big game, dude. That's a big game with lots of environments, and it's all 3D rendered, whereas most of the environments in Final Fantasy VII are pre-rendered. They're images. Mind you, Final Fantasy VIII was actually all 3D, wasn't it? Anyway, who knows? That's for another time. Another argument for another time. So the long story short is that Square ended up going with the CD-ROM and the Sony PlayStation. So can you remember when this happened? Do you remember reading about this by chance or hearing about it at the time?
No, I mean, I think I've got fragments of it from my magazines and stuff like that.
Yes. Because the thing is that we didn't know much about Square at the time. This is like 1995 going on 1996. And, we didn't know anything about it, but I remember reading about it. There's an image of Aerith and an airship that's quite famous that was in a magazine. And also, Square developed like a 3D rendered demo to see what it would look like, and they used Final Fantasy VI characters, and that's kind of what I remember as well. Was I think it was that the images from this demo were shown in a Nintendo magazine to be Final Fantasy VII, and I remember that. So, which is interesting, very interesting. So, anyway, as I just mentioned, Square turned their back on Nintendo. This led to 5 years of communication silence from Nintendo, apparently.
I see.
Nintendo said, fuck off. Basically.
They're a very proud company, aren't they?
Of course they are. I don't think a Final Fantasy game appeared on a Nintendo console again until Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles on the GameCube. So, 2 generations later. Which is insane. So, yeah, another change of the guard, let's say, in Squaresoft and the development of Final Fantasy VII includes the art director, or let's say the art designer, character designer. I might have mentioned this before. Yoshitaka Amano, the artist of the famous artist who does the covers and some illustrations for Vampire Hunter D, very distinct style. He was unavailable, and this is where the man the legend that is Tetsuya Nomura stepped in and designs the characters, and the rest is history. You know, he obviously designs characters for many Final Fantasy games after, including many of the characters in Kingdom Hearts, and their many belts, and you know, you can see a Tetsuya Nomura design from a long way away. But in the run-up to the release of Final Fantasy VII, which was November 1997, do you remember, Mark, the issue of CVG with Cloud on the cover, with the foil cover? Remember that by chance? It's a big magazine.
Yeah, rings a bell,
Yeah. Like, they were one of the first magazines that were not official PlayStation magazines to, like, really hype the game up. Which is interesting. So, after that brief rundown, can you say how you personally discovered Final Fantasy VII?
Well, it was thanks to you.
Oh, was it me again, was it? Oh,
yeah.
fuck.
I mean, I do remember that you were getting hype about this game, from what I remember. I mean, this was a long time ago.
I can't remember.
All I remember is we picked up a copy of it secondhand.
No.
Yeah?
Really?
All I know is that I think I must have obtained a copy secondhand after you got your copy. I just know that my copy was a secondhand copy, and I remember.
We traded it between us.
Yeah.
No,
but I just remember us buying it from down the heavy metal hippie haircut shop.
Is that the heavy metal the heavy metal hippie haircut shop? You mean Gumby's?
Yeah, that's what we used to call it.
Is that what we used to call it?
Yeah, man. That's what we used to be called. Like,
that's a blast. That's a blast from the past, man. Holy shit!
I remember at the time when we bought it, you were going on and on about the fact that when you buy games, you'd have to pay like several pounds per disc. And the guy that sold it to us didn't check and realise that there were 3 discs in the case. He thought there was only one because the way in which the case opened revealed the first disc. But then there were 2. Then there was the manual. Then there were the 2 other discs in the second slot. But he'd only charged you for a 1-disc game rather than a 3-disc game.
Really?
Yeah, I remember this, man. And you were proper. Yeah, you were proper chuffed about it.
How pathetic is that? That is like really sad.
And I remember it blowing our minds when we were like, "Oh my god, it's got 3 discs! Imagine what's on this! It's like there's so much space. That's 2,100 megabytes, man."
Yeah. Wow. Secondhand. Wow.
Yeah. And as you say, we did. We traded it. It's
between us, because I first discovered it for a friend. I want to say the first time I ever saw it, I must have read about it in CVG, right? But it didn't stick out to me at all. You know, there was the previews, and I remember reading it and just thinking whatever. And then there was the review. I remember the review because it sort of stated the things they changed for the UK release, such as like markers telling you where to go and stuff like that. Some things they'd improved over the NTSC versions. But like it wasn't the magazines that sold it to me. It was going around my friend Simon Harwood's house. And his dad was a massive gamer. And I remember going around there and seeing him play it. And what I saw was the opening bombing mission when they go to blow up the Mako reactor and they end up fighting the one of the big robot monster or something like that.
The airbuster.
Something like that, yeah, something like that. And I just remember being like completely and totally blown away by the graphics. And then after that, I want to say I rented it from Starburst around the corner from us. And I got to that boss and couldn't get past it. And I remember, like, on the manual, it had, like, an image of Midgar. Wow, that's another flashback. I remember getting a postcard from a magazine with Midgar on it and having it on my wall. Wow, that's a long time ago. And it advertising the use of memory cards. And then I guess after that, that's when we got it. I must have got it secondhand then. Wow, didn't know that. I forgot. Yeah. I can't remember. I can't remember buying it. I can't remember. That's crazy. How fun is that? Good old Gumbies. Bought so many CDs in there.
Yeah, we got so much stuff in there. Yeah,
and games, and posters and stuff. The good old days, eh? So, right, that's really interesting. Really, that's kind of blown my mind, to be honest with you. Because then, Well, I don't remember us playing it for the first time, but I remember us playing it together. You know, I remember it. You know, there being, for example, one of my best, like, clearest memories is when we got to the Golden Saucer, and we heard about Knights of the Round, didn't we? Do you remember this?
Yeah.
What? Tell the story. This is where you tell the story.
Oh, and Knights of the Round was that was the legendary materia. This was the big one.
Yeah.
This was the one where the ultimate summon.
Yeah.
And once we'd heard about that, it was a case of, well, we need to get our hands on this shit. Like, we need this. We wanted to tear this game apart. We wanted everything. We wanted to see every summon, every cutscene, because we thought they were fucking awesome.
The summons were like the coolest part of the game, weren't they, in terms of gameplay? The concept of like summoning these monsters or gods and there being like really elaborate, really awesome cutscenes and them just coming down and doing tons of damage. It was like,
I still remember the first time you showed me Ifrit.
Yes.
And it was on a level which was kind of like a roller coaster style, like a fighting stage.
Yeah.
Where you stood on there, and the way in which he used to reach down and rip a lump of earth out of the ground and hurl it, a blazing ball of like magma at the enemies.
I don't think that was Ifrit. I thought Ifrit just sort of flew through you on fire or something, I think.
Oh, I have to check that. I have images of someone ripping a lump of earth out of the ground and hurling.
That was Titan, I think.
I think I'm getting
that was the earth. That was the earth one. He picked the ground up beneath you and flipped you over on it. I think that was 7. I want to say Titan was in 8 as well, actually.
Oh no, you're right. Yeah, I'm thinking now of Ifrit like kind of being suspended in the air with fire breathing out of his mouth. And,
Yes.
Yeah, because those were the big two that I remember as being the starters were Ifrit and Shiva.
Yes.
No,
Shiva.
Yeah, what was it? Hellfire and Diamond Dust.
Yes, exactly. Mind-blowing stuff when you first saw it.
Yeah.
That was the thing about this game in general, wasn't it? Like, it was like a series of firsts for so many things, so many ways. Like, while it was like presented with like simplistic graphics and text dialogue, like the cutscenes, man, as you said, the CGI, the CGI cutscenes, like were like mind blowing.
Yep.
We were seeing like movies happen, not like video movies, live action movies like in Resident Evil, actual CGI movies that, well, often, sometimes they were like, they replicated the chibi graphics of the overworld, but other times they replicated the more realistic graphics of the fight scenes, and it was like watching like a fucking CGI anime, wasn't it? It was incredible, absolutely mind-blowing, the action scenes and stuff. But one thing I remember, about Knights of the Round, which was like the most powerful summon in the game, we've read about it, didn't we? And you said you wanted to unlock it. And how you unlocked it.
God damn, that was fucking convoluted, wasn't it?
do you remember how you unlocked it?
You had to breed for about 6 different generations of Chocobo with combined nuts and like manifesting new colours that gained new abilities until eventually you raised the golden Chocobo.
That's right.
The one that could run across all terrain and water. And that's the only way in which to crack the island up north.
Yes.
That was all secluded in its own sort of like off to one side sort of like place. There's no means by which you'd come across it under any other circumstance unless you knew how to get there and you knew it was there. It was such a bitch. But yeah, we got it. And yeah, it was great. That said, the only downside to it is Knights of the Round probably also had the longest sequence. And
also, to do the most damage in the game, you had to use other abilities. What was it? It was Quadra Magic. So
that's the one where you linked it on. You linked it with another. Was it a Quadra Summon? I think like Quadra Magic could only be used with the green materia.
Oh, right, cool. Yeah, okay, yeah.
But yeah, exactly. It kind of used to duplicate it over and over again.
And then Mime.
Yeah.
So you would do it 12 times. Over and over and over again to kill like the most powerful monsters.
Yeah, just constant. Yeah, this is the thing: is a lot of the battles against the real beasts in this, and we'll get to those later. Some of those real beasts. It turned into a chess game of you just sitting down for about half hour and going, "What's the best way in which to take this guy down?"
This is. I always loved the combat. That was one of the things I remember first is trying the combat and seeing how it was like a tactical turn-based game like chess, you could say, and loving it, thinking like I want a multiplayer version of this, which I guess we would get years later when you introduced me to Heroes of Might and Magic, I suppose. But like, Yeah, I loved the combat and the animations and stuff. The concept of grinding was a bit lost on me. I didn't really understand it. I think that might have been why I couldn't get past the first boss at first. Maybe I'm not sure. Obviously, I was
But
young and
yeah,
didn't understand
when
the
you
game.
games like Sonic and everything that had come before, you hammer through the level and you kill the boss because you don't get stronger. But this was the idea of like, okay, you're not strong enough, well, go away, get stronger, and come back.
Well, you played games where you got stronger, like for example, in games like Metroid and Zelda,
and Mega Man, where you gain the abilities of bosses, but then you have to work out.
Yeah, exactly. And but also regarding Zelda and Metroid, if you like explored the area more, you would find more health and become stronger that way. If you went off the beaten path and looked for secrets, it wasn't like you had to just repeat something over and over again to increase your level for a series of numbers.
This was a power creep, which you sometimes didn't realize how powerful you got until. Yeah. And that we did a lot of grinding. We used to throw that memory card back and forth along with the game.
Yeah.
And if we had a day off, we'd go, okay, I'm just going to spend the day grinding out in the fields and stuff like that. And you used to sort of like just run in circles constantly until the fight sequence struck. And it's the way the screen used to fragment and shift. Mm-hmm. And then the music would kick in, which you learn to hate that music. If you were in a situation where you absolutely did not want to get into a fight, you had to get to a place or there was a time limit or something like that, and then suddenly that happens.
Oh, it's the worst, man. The dungeons. Oh,
man, the anxiety that comes with hoping a fight isn't going to happen made it such a jolt when they did kick in.
Yeah, not having enough tents to use at save points, running out of materia, magic, and not running out of potions and stuff. Oh, it's so annoying. It's so annoying. Hated it. I'm so glad that RPGs have gone the way nowadays where like most of that kind of grinding mechanic and running out of items is just not even a thing anymore. Save points aren't even a thing anymore, to be honest with you, and fast travel is a thing now. My current favourite JRPG series, Xenoblade, you can save anywhere you want. Doesn't matter where it is, you just stop and save. You can fast travel anywhere. Whenever you want.
That removes a lot of the anxiety that comes with those sort of games.
Just the unnecessary repetition, to be honest with you, as well, because that's how these games lasted so long. Because of dying and redoing bits and walking across entire maps all over again. It's fucking awful. I hate doing it now, to be honest with you. If you go back and play like old Final Fantasy games now, they just add like loads and loads of cheats, so it's easier because no one wants to bother with that anymore. So, yeah, there was another thing that I. Well, actually, let me put it to you. Do you have any other anecdotes regarding this game around when we first started playing it?
There was the I wouldn't say unbridled rage, but there was a certain perturbedness when you deleted the first game that we were playing.
Oh no, I forgot about this.
Yes, I still remember. I remember the time when we were in your bedroom, we were playing this game, and you were going, okay, I've just got to sort some things out of my memory card. So, no problem. And we were about 8 hours deep at this point. We'd managed to get out of Midgar. I think, was it Niflheim, of the name of the town?
Nibelheim.
Nibelheim, that's it. And we were there. We got to that point. And you were doing some house cleaning of your memory card, just getting rid of 1 or 2 files that you didn't think you needed anymore. And I remember you were talking to me at the time, and I don't know if your finger slipped, but you selected our saved game. And then when I clicked it, when you clicked it, there's that moment when a file gets deleted on the game where you can actually see it slowly start to shrink until it disappears as a dot. And that was painful. That was actually very painful.
But I don't remember this, mate. I remember doing it. I remember doing it on Breath of Fire 3, which means I did it twice.
Yeah.
Fuck it, hell. I do remember doing it twice, but like I can't believe I did it to Final Fantasy VII. My God.
Yeah. Nonetheless, it was a very painful memory, but nonetheless, we still endeavoured to make sure that we were going to sit down, we were going to come back stronger to that same point, and then move forwards.
Any other anecdotes, Mark?
No, that one took up a significant portion of my memories. I've
got one that's going to make you howl with laughter, or maybe not. Yeah. And brought this up until now. So, it was tradition in many like RPGs, such as Zelda, where when you first start your save file, you would name your character.
Oh yeah, I know where this is going. Yeah.
And like I used to call I just called my character Gavin, I guess.
No, you called him Gavsky.
No, in Zelda. Maybe Gavsky. Maybe it was Gavsky. I'm not sure. Nowadays it's Gavsky, but whatever. I called my Link character in Zelda Gavin. Maybe there's maybe one or two other games that I should do that with. I'm not sure. I'm pretty sure it was you who was controlling the game at the beginning when we got to name. Because in Final Fantasy VII, you could name every single character, can't you?
Yeah.
This has sort of like changed here and there over the years. Sometimes it's just been the main character and like a love interest, or it's just been the summons, or well. But in this one, you could name all the protagonists, one after another. And like, I think I might have like bullied you into naming the main character after me, maybe, or pressured you. And that's when you named the main character Gavmeister.
Oh yeah.
And like, yeah, I kind of remember like you referring to him as Gavmeister in a sort of comedic way because of how the plot went. Because then we set out and named the characters after us and our friends. So we named Barrett after you.
Yep, I stand by it. The bastard has a gun on his hand. He's awesome.
Yeah, that's right. Not emo at all, like Cloud either. And then we named Tifa after my girlfriend at the time, Jess. And then we named Aerith, who was called Aerith in this version. Aerith, we named them after your sister, Danielle.
Oh yeah, we did, didn't we?
Do you remember what happened with this?
Oh yeah, I remember the Golden Saucer sequence.
The Golden Saucer sequence and this horrific love trial that happens between the characters. And I was remember me thinking it had no like bearing whatsoever when we named these characters. But when like Gavmeister started like being flirted with by Danielle and it got really awkward and really funny, I just remember you finding it absolutely fucking hilarious that your sister was flirting with me in a video game, effectively. You know, oh dear. And I remember us like, because in that sequence you can make it. We'll discuss this later. You can like alter the conversation, can't you, and change it. You know.
Yeah. Oh my god, we named Red 13 after Cav, didn't we? Kavna, because they were both ginger.
I remember we named Sid after your brother, Adam,
yeah,
because he looked a bit like him. Kate Sif, Glenn.
Glenn,
Kate Sif was Glenn. Sorry, Glenn, if you're listening ever. Sorry.
Yep, sorry.
And Yuffie, I can't remember who we named her after.
Or Vincent. Yeah, I can't remember those ones.
Or Vincent, yeah, I can't remember those ones. Can't remember. But,
God, you're right. That is a bit of a blast.
Isn't it? Well, I remember my mate at college told me when he played Final Fantasy VIII, he named Squall Mr. Bond. It just ruins the game for him completely because everyone calling him Mr. Bond all the time. He just kept on hearing that. And
well, I suppose some of the pivotal sequences in Final Fantasy VII might have been somewhat ruined by the references to Gavmeister.
Yes. These days, I don't change character names. I just, I don't want to be the character. I want to see the characters, in the narrative. And I won't be referring to any of the characters as we discuss the story based on the names we gave them. So don't worry about that as well. But yeah, unfortunately, that's like one of the big takeaways from my memories at the time is that. And the story almost being ruined because of it. Oh dear. Nowadays, I look at it from a more distant perspective, but yeah. So, but yeah, it was an exciting time. It was mind blowing. I remember reading that story. Maybe you told me about it. That Final Fantasy VII was like the most returned video game of all time. You remember that?
No, I can potentially understand why, because a lot of people may not have known what they were getting into with that game.
Yes, exactly. Because the promotion machine was like insane. Like so many.
Oh, it made look like this is going to be the biggest game you ever play. It's like,
that's
fuck
right.
Yeah.
I seem to remember like my dad telling me about the trailers and saying like, "What is this? It looks like a film." And like the trailers just showed all the cutscenes and snippets from the gameplay, but then it turns out that actually like the gameplay is nothing like the cutscenes whatsoever, and it's top-down isometric with chibi characters and lots of text.
Yeah,
and
ready for exposition.
Yes. Actually, I seem to remember the game being quite good with that. Actually, seem to remember that for some reason, but and like the battles, aren't really like, it's not gameplay, is it? The whole turn-based idea is not gameplay by what you would have called gameplay in those days. As I said, like RPGs, this is before Pokemon, I want to say as well. RPGs were action games. To us in the UK, they weren't these turn-based affairs. So, but anyway, that's enough about that. Enough about the some small anecdotes about the release of the game. You got anything else to add on any of these topics, Mark?
Nah, man. Let's get into it.
Cool, let's get into it. Okay, then. So we're going to take a break, and then we're going to go through the story. So, be right back. Welcome back to the podcast. So, let's crack on with the Final Fantasy VII narrative. So, Mark, can you remember what themes were apparent overall in this story?
Well, in terms of setting, it's got very much a steampunk cyberpunk vibe to it. In terms of like that conflicting with nature.
Yeah.
Was one of the big ones, the takeaways. That's one thing I've noticed is a bit of a trend for a lot of the Final Fantasy games I've played through, is that they do have a lot to do with Earth and ecology and life force and mana and those kind of like concepts of a unifying life force.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And this is no exception. That this all exists in spades here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's pivotal. It's pivotal. But there's also, because this is like the starting theming of the story. But also, I think that in retrospect, this game actually has quite a lot to make of its characterization and how it deals with the psychology of its characters, especially Cloud, the protagonist. I think it's really interesting when you look back on it now and see the efforts that went to allow this narrative to unfold in the way it does, because there's Cloud Strife, ironically, his name is a complex character. You know, I actually think that like further entries into the media franchise that is Final Fantasy VII have actually ruined his character more. Yeah, I do. I will tell you why when we talk about Advent Children, the sequel movie that came out.
Well, they leaned into certain aspects of his personality far too hard.
They retconned certain aspects of his personality. Like, you know, as a character, Cloud makes a lot of progress in this game. A lot. You know? And they kind of retcon all of that completely with Advent Children and turn him into a fucking emo again. So,
yep.
Which is annoying personally. For me, especially. So, but also in regard to the palette of this game is quite chaotic, tonally. Would you agree with that?
In terms of the palettes?
In terms of its palette, yeah. In terms of its tonal palette, let's say.
It's not terms of, like the different emotions that come with different characters.
Just the tone of the narrative, like, you know, you've got like extremely dramatic, moving sequences, and you've got really stupid, idiotic comedy. You've got cross-dressing, you've got rape made light of at one point, you know.
Yeah.
You know, you go like the game's got a globe-trotting sequence. Obviously, it is a video game first and foremost. This is not a story first and foremost, and therefore, I imagine like environments were designed to make it each one memorable and distinct from the last to excite the player, rather than create a cohesive social world. Which I'm fine with, you know. And as I said, like some of the narrative ideas in it certainly have not aged very well. But you know, I think later games in the series certainly had a more unified tone than this. But I'm not saying this is a bad thing either. I think it's actually quite effective that this game has quite a wide tone, because sometimes it's quite funny.
In terms of the ways in which it swings from one extreme to another, you're right.
I
mean, for the majority of the early part of the game, you are confined to this grimy, dark sort of city, which
dystopian, cyberpunk almost.
You feel the smog as the camera descends in and zooms in on Aerith. I don't know how I'm going to refer to her in this review, but I'm going to snap between them. Aerith is how I used to know her.
Yeah, it's fine.
Yeah, and it slowly zooms in on her holding a basket of flowers. Isn't that right?
That's right. The game starts with her.
And you feel that descent into the city, into the underworld of the city.
Nice contrast, actually, isn't it? Nice contrast.
Well,
Remember that shot with the train? Yeah.
And all of that was just visually beautiful. The way it brought you in, it made you feel you were coming into this city, and then you feel almost trapped in this city for the early part of the narrative. That you are running around trying to find ways in which to move up through the city and how to move forwards. You do get that kind of sense of, well, you come up against the walls a couple of times of the city itself, and you realise how contained it is, and that there is a wider world out there, but you can't see it yet.
It's interesting. It's a contained world, isn't it? Again, I don't feel like it makes much sense in terms of like, a social, in terms of its world building, let's say. But like, because it is a video game, but like, it makes it quite effective. It does. Yeah. It is effective. It is effective. So, for the sake of brevity and for the sake of the study of this episode, I'm going to be focusing on the main plot, which is mainly to do with the, let's say, backstory that leads to the meeting of the main characters, and the main character Cloud, Strife, and the antagonist Sephiroth. So, and like, I'm gonna, like, for the most part, like, Red 13, Vincent, although he is kind of to do with the story, you can skip him. You know, Kate Sith, Sid, and many of these characters I will be skipping because
they're all part of the story, but they're not part of the main flow.
No. One of the interesting things, actually, that was pointed out in a video essay that I watched recently is every single one of the protagonists has been affected by the Corporation Shinra, the villain of the story, which is cool. You know, every single one is scarred by Shinra. Even Kate Sith is scarred by Shinra, because if you remember, Kate Sith ends up being a spy.
Yeah, he throws the materia to...
Yeah, no, to who?
Oh, I forget. Is it one of the Turks?
In the Gold Saucer, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And then, like, ends up sacrificing himself out of guilt, and then another one's built to replace him and whatever, you know. Like, Sid has that space program, whatever, and Red 13's experimented on. Yuffie and her home country were at war with Midgar at one point in the narrative, which is actually, like, quite a buried narrative point in the story, to be honest with you. You have to pay attention to catch that part. You know, so while that is like coherent, it isn't part of the overall theme of Final Fantasy VII, which to me is life in as many. Well, it's complicated. Life is an important part of the theming of this story, but I also think it is, in regard to life, the umbrella term, one's life, I would say, is also important. It's not just about the many, but it is also about the one, if you know what I mean. Because this video game is very much about the introduction of a character's psyche, the breaking of a character's psyche, and then the rebuilding of this character's psyche into something completely new and taking charge, you know. Which is a fascinating arc in itself, in my opinion, and how it relates to everyone else. So that's what I'm going to focus on. Okay, so this is do you know the term media res, Mark?
No.
Media res is a term in literature where a story starts halfway through. This is commonly accepted to be the best, most engaging way to start a narrative. This is what I meant earlier on when I mentioned that how I actually think that this game's narrative is quite tight and quite well told. Because you're not given a bunch of text that says, Shinra is this, Shinra is that. You're not given a bunch of text that says, soldier is this, soldier is that. Instead, you are introduced to the main character, Cloud, aren't you, as a member of Soldier. And he is hired by the resistance group, Avalanche, which is led by Barrett. Remember this?
Yep.
It's the train, isn't it? He gets off the train.
He flips off the train, and that's still an iconic image in my mind as the introduction of him just one-handedly springing off that train and landing on the platform.
Absolutely. It was the scene that Sony used to advertise the PlayStation 3 with that CGI trailer that people thought was an actual remake.
Yeah, I think that's kind of what gave birth to it, because of the kickback of like, what, you mean you're not? Let's not?
Yeah, exactly. But this is important because, you know, this is not a complex film in terms of its visuals or a modern video game in terms of its graphics and character models. These are like simple, polygonal chibi, large head anime bodies that don't actually speak. They just move very simply, don't they? And you have dialogue instead, text dialogue. And everything is explained through the dialogue. You know, you learn that through Barrett's anger, because he's extremely animated, isn't he? That, you know, Shinra, the company, the corporation that runs this dystopian city, Midgar, harnessing Mako, the energy from the planet, to power the city, and he is against this, and so he forms the resistance group Avalanche, and they hire Cloud, who is ex-member of the elite force soldier, once part of Shinra. So this immediately sets Cloud up as being like a strong, powerful protagonist, and his persona is immediately like represented, isn't he? He's cold, very cold, and he's a mercenary, which is it's tropey, isn't it? He's a mercenary who's only interested in the next paycheck, isn't he? He just wants to know when he's going to get paid. You know,
because mercenaries aren't normally like heroes necessarily, at least to begin with.
He's an anti-hero. He starts with, isn't he? Really, I suppose you could say he is the player character. I can't remember whether or not you can change the player character. It's been a while. Furthermore, like, the planet itself is a character, isn't it, in this story? And, like, it becomes retroactively known as Gaia, which is, you know, the word Gaia is a common phrase for, like...
existed for thousands of years, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Sentient, planetary, godlike creatures. There's a good juxtaposition between the characters in this, in my opinion, between Cloud and Barrett. Cloud is, I'll say, cold and distant, and Barrett is incredibly emotional and loud and abrasive. He's angered by Cloud's lack of excitement of the mission.
How many times does he fire his gun into the air to make a point?
Yeah. I mean, it's partially down to the limited animations that the characters have, but at the same time, it's effective because he is that way, isn't he?
Yeah.
He is that way. But yeah, so basically the plan is that this resistance group, Avalanche, that Cloud leads, they are attacking these Mako reactors that are, you know, drawing energy from the city, from the Gaia planet. Like that's where like the eco-friendly themes begin, really, isn't it? And it's here that Cloud is reunited with his childhood friend Tifa, who's also a part of Avalanche, and like they end up attacking a couple of these reactors, and they are mixed levels of success. And this is where Cloud then meets Aerith/Aeris, isn't it? Just like accidentally, and then he meets her again. And this is where you find out that Shinra are actually after Aerith, because they believe that Aerith is going to be difficult for me as well, that she is not human, and she's part of this ancient race called the Cetra, who will lead, to go to religious connotations, who will lead Shinra to the Promised Land, where they believe they will have the most access to Mako and the life stream energy of the planet and create their like ultimate Midgar. Is it Neo Midgar they call it? So anyway, after like the second attack on the Mako reactor, Shinra responds, don't they, by basically destroying an entire section of their own city.
Yeah, to let it fall onto the slums where they believe that the terrorist group is hiding.
Correct. And they kill a lot of people. And this, like, you know...
We lose Biggs and Wedge.
Oh. Bloody Biggs and Wedge.
Yeah, Star Wars reference, isn't it? Yeah.
Yes. So there's a couple of important things to note here anyway, is that, like, Cloud himself has seemingly random seizures, doesn't he?
A lot of them, to be honest.
Well, yeah, over the course of the game, yeah. There's one that involves a flashback of Tifa and the murder of her father at the hands of Sephiroth, which is interesting. Very interesting. And important later on. So, basically, when Shinra drops this plate, Avalanche, the team, attempt to stop it. Aerith is kidnapped, and in anger, Barrett decides to go to Shinra and to have a showdown with them. You know, and this is where the story starts to get interesting, if you remember. So
is this the assault on the tower?
That's correct. That's correct.
Yeah.
The Shinra Tower. Yeah, they find Red 13. A dog, wolf-like creature who's being experimented on. And they rescue Aerith. But more importantly, it's the first time we see Jenova.
I remember that when he looks in that window, man.
Yeah, really quite harrowing at the time.
Yeah, because at the time you didn't even know what the fuck you were looking at.
Yeah.
Suddenly this visual appears on the screen. You're like, what the fuck did I just see?
Yeah.
Yeah. It was because up until that point you'd had, I'd say, the polygonal graphics and everything, and then suddenly you got this very detailed image just suddenly flash up. And I've gone back over the years. I've looked at it again where people have like screen capped it and stuff, and it's like you can see that it's a headless body. But at the time, I had no fucking idea what I was looking at. All I know is it jolted me.
Yeah, it's very abstract. But yeah, when he sees this, he starts having another seizure, doesn't he? Which is very important. We also find out Hojo adds some important information about Aerith's origins, talking about how she's not human because she's etc., and how he wants to experiment on her and breed her. Hojo is another important character in this story. He's a scientist, isn't he? He's like the disciple of Professor Gast. So as the story goes on, Cloud, Tifa, and Barrett, or whatever combination of Red 13 and Aerith you have under your control, they end up finding this trail of blood that begins in the containment facility where Jenova is, and they follow this trail of blood. And along the way, they're finding dead bodies everywhere, the Shinra Guard. And then it results in them finding the dead body of President Shinra, the antagonist of the story up until this point. And Tifa and Cloud both recognize that it is Sephiroth's sword that is sticking out of him. Now, I think that this story does some really interesting stuff with Sephiroth, its antagonist. There's a lot of build-up, isn't there? A lot of hinting. You know, it's at this point where, like, Sephiroth... I'm pretty sure Tifa says, but Sephiroth died 5 years ago. How can this be? You know, Sephiroth was a member of Soldier, just like Cloud. A super soldier, so to speak. And the shock and awe and horror that comes from the characters, you know, being confused at the return of this important villain, let's say, this character, it builds up a lot of tension, a lot of intrigue as to who is Sephiroth, what does he do. So the story goes on. You know, they end up meeting the new leader of Shinra, Rufus, and then Cloud and the team end up escaping from Midgar completely. And as you mentioned earlier on, you know, they go into this more lush, natural world, don't they?
Can I just draw us back to the fact that escape sequence was fucking badass?
Oh, the bike sequence, isn't it?
Yes, when you drive that bike out the window and you crash down onto the freeway with them in behind and the truck coming out the front doors. Yeah, I was pumped by that point, man. Like, the thing is, this story at this point has gone through them making their way from the slums of Midgard, building all the way up the corporate tower to the top, where they've come face to face with the villain and found him executed by an even bigger villain. Now, in a normal story, this would be the 3-act story. This would be where you'd expect the climax to occur. That they've built their way up from the ground to the top, and then suddenly now the story's stepping sideways, and you're coming out of a window on a motorcycle, you're driving down a freeway, and then you have that moment with them at the end of that freeway where it's they've stopped building it, and it just hangs over the edge of the wall.
Yes.
And you see it's their opportunity to leave the city and explore. And you realise the story hasn't even fucking begun yet.
That's right. This is a great example of the Freytag's pyramid concept, where, like, during the infiltration of the Shinra building, we're going up a hill, or this great revelatory moment. You know, the stakes are rising and rising and rising and rising. We're wondering what is going on. And it's at that exact moment where it's Sephiroth. What's Sephiroth doing here? And then like the narrative takes a downturn swiftly, let's say, and we get that escape sequence that goes down, and we're moving away from that moment. But it's still in our sights. We still remember it because it's such a pivotal moment until we reach the end of Midgar. And then at this point, we start going up another hill, up another climb of Freytag's Pyramid, which is where the story now continues. Because there's that important line when Cloud says, because let's be honest, right? At this point in the story, it's been about stopping Shinra, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's been your villain up to this point. I mean, Sephiroth has been mentioned in passing, but you don't know who he is, really. I mean, you know he's a person from the past, but you don't know his motivations. You don't know anything about him. All you know is that Shinra are the people that you're meant to defeat, right?
But now Shinra has been effectively... Well, the Shinra as we knew it has been destroyed.
Yeah.
It's being run by someone else now, Rufus, and you're chased out of here, and basically you've got nowhere else to go. And that's where Cloud says, we need to find Sephiroth. Oh, we've got to stop him. I've got a score to settle. And they agree to join up and to go for it, don't they? And this is kind of where the story starts to become interesting. Because Cloud recounts how he knows Sephiroth, doesn't he, in the scene of a flashback.
With the Nibelheim.
That's correct. That's correct. So what happens here is that a Mako reactor at Mount Nibel, near Nibelheim, is malfunctioning, creating monsters. And Shinra sends Sephiroth and Cloud to investigate. And I don't know if you remember this, but this is where we start to see like Sephiroth's awesome power. There's a moment where you have like a fight against a
I remember that so fucking much. I actually remember when I played that fight sequence, I thought, I'm going to attack Sephiroth on this bitch. Just to see. And 2 damage, man. 2.
And he hits the dragon and does like 3,000 damage.
Yeah, it's in the thousands. And that is your first, because that was your first indicator of this motherfucker's a beast and you are nothing compared to him.
Yeah.
Which is a very clever way of like just demonstrating sort of like exactly how big the gap is between these 2 characters.
Yeah. Very smart. Very smart.
You don't know how much you've grown since that time, but you know that you're doing 2 damage, he's doing 3,000.
Well, I'm pretty sure even in present day, at that point, you're probably doing between 200 and 500 damage per hit on the monsters that you're fighting, apart from doing like the super moves and the magic. So, like, in flashback form in the past, seeing this character do 3,000 damage is probably quite impressive.
Was a little bit sobering. So.
Yeah. So yeah, anyway, Sephiroth and Cloud are sent to investigate this malfunctioning Mako generator. See, Nibelheim is the hometown of Cloud and Tifa. Tifa is their guide and leads them. Always remember that cute cowboy hat or hat she had on.
Yeah.
Tifa leads them to the generator, which is where we find these creatures that are like being born there in these like chambers. The vats, that's right. They're like monstrous because the idea is that the soldier class, as it's called in capitals, they're like humans who are kind of like experimented on with Mako to make them stronger. And like
the Captain America's more essentially,
basically, yeah. And Sephiroth knows that he's one of those. And Cloud, Cloud is one at this point in the story. So you imagine in the flashback that Cloud is one as well. And then when Sephiroth sees these creatures that look like they've been, they're like ugly and they're like dying, and one of them like chokes or something, and falls out of one of these generators, these prison things, and Sephiroth starts to like feel like these are like soldier prototypes, doesn't he? And that's when like Sephiroth's madness begins, isn't it? Because Sephiroth is a character who we'll probably talk. We'll give our overall thoughts, I think, on how we feel about Sephiroth as a character probably later on as we go. I think that's fair, once we've just sort of gone through the basic narrative. But it basically sends Sephiroth insane. And he starts to question his origins. He starts to think, am I like these monsters? And then they go to the Nibelheim mansion, which, I don't know, say what you want. There happens to be a mansion in this town, near this generator, where they built. There's all these notes left behind by this
all the books and all the information you could possibly need.
Blah, 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 blah. Whatever. It's all there. Sephiroth goes in. It's a Deus Ex Machina building, literally, plot device, whatever. He goes in this building, which happens to be in Cloud and Tifa's hometown, and then, raids all the notes, and he discovers the concept of Jenova, doesn't he?
Mm.
And he sort of realizes that he is the result of biological experiments with Jenova. And he's a bit confused as to what Jenova is. But he knows that Jenova is this great power and sort of recognizes Jenova as his true mother and becomes sort of obsessed with her, obsessed with finding her. And he takes his anger out on Shinra and on the town, sets fire to the entire village. There's that great iconic scene that's been done 1,000 times, isn't there? When Cloud
he stands up in the flames.
Exactly. Cloud comes back and finds his hometown ablaze. Sephiroth is standing in the blaze and just looks at him and just turns around and walks away. And Cloud's going, no, going crazy. And it ends up in a confrontation after it's discovered that Sephiroth has killed Tifa's dad and Cloud's mother, between Cloud and Sephiroth, and ends with Cloud mortally wounded, and Sephiroth and the beheaded head of Jenova falling into the live stream, presumably dead.
So you say falling, but that was a badass moment, man. When he stabbed his sword through Cloud's chest, and Cloud lifts him up with the sword. And bounces him off a fucking wall. It's just It was that moment you go, holy shit, Cloud might have some skills here. I want to see more of that.
Yeah. And this humongous sequence of not exposition but narrative is probably it is the most important sequence of events in the story.
It's key. Isn't it? Everything pivots on this moment.
Yeah. So. But so the characters are on a globe-trotting journey from this point on, and this is where the game starts to have a tonal dissonance where they sort of go from place to place, each one more different from the last, blah 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 blah, and the narrative sort of takes some twists and turns, and for the sake of building a party, isn't it? Really, you do get some detail on Shinra. How they've influenced and affected all these people in all these towns and all these places, but it always comes back to Sephiroth, Cloud, Tifa, and Aerith, really, isn't it? And Aerith. They're the 4 pillars, aren't they, of this story? And I think something that one of the most important areas, which we mentioned earlier on the podcast, is the Golden Saucer, isn't it? Although it sort of represents a mini-game centre, doesn't it?
God, I love that game. I stayed so long in the Gold Saucer, man.
You did, yeah.
I became actually quite good at that snowboarding arcade machine.
So. I'm pretty sure the arcades in there unlocked as you did the mini-games.
No, but I'll tell you what I fucking didn't do in Golden Saucer.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't pick up... what was the lightning summon? Was it?
Oh, Ramu.
I didn't pick up Ramu. It was a fucking scene where you wait in a waiting room.
Oh, we missed him, didn't we? On our first
racing.
Playthrough.
Yeah, you have.
Yeah, I remember this.
The summon is in a plant pot in the corner of a waiting room whilst you're waiting to do chocobo racing, and it's a scene that's only visitable once because it's part of the narrative storyline. And once you go back, you can't go back to that area. And as a result, for the rest of the game, we did not have one of the summons. I mean, it's only because we did have a strategy guide, but we blew past that point without realizing. And that kind of that angered me a little bit because it's the one. If I had one criticism about the game, is there were one or two parts like that where it was possible to miss not key aspects of the story, but key aspects of the awesome. So I really wanted to go back and get that summon. So.
I remember that. I'd forgotten about that. But regarding the Golden Saucer and how it actually acts as a side attraction to the game, there's actually some really important characterization that happens here, isn't there? Because Cloud and Aerith.
When you're on the what was it? What's the
it's
name
a big wheel, isn't it? It's a big wheel.
I thought it was like a Oh, what am I thinking of? The hanging carriages that go along a zip line, but it's like motorized. I thought it was like something like that.
In my head, it's a big wheel, but it
Fair
is
enough, yeah.
definitely a hanging carriage. So we're
Yes,
between the two of us, we're there.
yeah.
But
At the end of the day, the two of them are secluded in a small location, and Cloud is uncomfortable as fuck.
yes, but like, it's kind of interesting, really, because Aerith as a character comes across as someone very natural, very full of life, isn't she?
Very self-assured.
Very self-assured, very caring, very empathetic. You know, I mean, she's a healer class, so I guess maybe that's relevant as well. But in the grand scheme of things, she is someone who sees the beauty in everything, and the beauty in the world, the wonders of the world. You know, she's in tune with the world, and I think a lot of that is to do with because she's a Cetra, isn't she? She's one of these this ancient race of people that settled on the planet years and years ago. And she sort of takes a liking to Cloud, doesn't she? The reasons as to why she takes a liking to Cloud are kind of revealed later in the narrative. But at this point in the story, and looking back now...
you think it's just someone taking a shine to someone else and that's it?
I think she sees something in him. I think that she's trying to sort of wake him up from his emotional coma.
Well, doesn't she actually say something to the tune of that? It's like, Cloud, I'm trying to reach you. That's right.
I remember us laughing our heads off at that point because it was your sister saying it to me as well, because of the names, or how embarrassing, how we've ruined it. But looking back now, yeah, you know, it was Cloud. She was trying to reach him, and while you could take that with like romantic connotations, yes, I do think that she's trying to reach inside him and reach through this barrier that he puts up, and you know how he there's something inside Cloud that he's trying to hide. He's trying to keep the world out of it. You know, she holds her heart out on her sleeve and tries to touch him. You know, and based on the dialogue options you're given anyway, you can choose how much he reciprocates to her. And we
did not reciprocate, did we?
No, we didn't. It was embarrassing. But years later, I did, and like it's quite a touching, really nice, beautiful sequence of dialogue. But what I wanted to touch on here was that, whereas I mentioned that the flashback sequence on that day 5 years ago is the most important sequence of events in the story, Aerith as a character actually represents the core of the story overall. And is probably the most important character of the protagonist's class, let's say, in the narrative. Why? We'll get to after the break. Welcome back to the podcast. So from this point on, after the previous notation, let's say, I sort of played around with the timeline a little bit. Going to be going slightly more in time with how the story is presented in the game, meaning that we're going to start from the period where Sephiroth has escaped and the party are chasing Sephiroth after they have escaped from Midgar. So obviously, as we mentioned, you have that like great bike chase, don't you? But I think one of the things that's really important about this moment is that up until this moment, you've been trapped in Midgar, which is essentially a dystopian, borderline cyberpunk environment, isn't it?
Yeah, very Gerben, very dirty.
Yeah. And then suddenly you find yourself in like an open world, as open as is, you know. How much of this world you can travel is based on like your vehicles. So at this point you're on foot, and then you can like cross rivers, and then you can go shallow waters, and then you can go further and further and further. But like at this point you are able to like pretty much go where you want, aren't you? And
it's a little shock to the senses when it kind of pans back and gives you that world map of lush green.
Yes.
You realise you can go anywhere, and
yes.
well, I say anywhere, but you've got free reign to run away from Midgar in any direction you want.
Yes.
So it's a bit of a shock to the senses.
I mean, like, geographically, it's quite illogical, really. It is just a giant green plain with, like, a town in it, rather than, you know, a realistic depiction of a world. But this is a PlayStation 1 game released in 1997, developed between 1994 and 1996, you know. It is what it is. I'm not going to critique that. But a few interesting elements of the story happen now, and that's where we start to see Sephiroth clones. Do you remember the Sephiroth clones?
Yeah, I do.
They're like hooded, aren't they? And they're talking about a reunion, which is not only relevant for the entirety of this story, but very relevant to the movie sequel Final Fantasy Advent Children. Yeah, and there's a really definitely. But there's a really interesting piece of dialogue coming up as well, where Hojo says to Cloud, "Do you ever get the feeling you're being called somewhere?" That's a great piece of foreshadowing. So we find Corel, which is where we get a little bit of backstory for Barrett, which we're going to skip now. And then we go to the Golden Saucer, which we discussed earlier on, more so to do with the relationship between Cloud and Tifa and Aerith and all the silly things that happen with the names. So this is where we discover what Sephiroth's plan actually is, and that is he is looking for the black materia. Now, materia, if you remember, Mark, is like the magic system of this game, and it's infinitely customizable, isn't it?
Man, I lived materia for several months, if not years.
You did.
I was sat there like at school during classes, just in my mind going, okay, if I put the Quadra Magic with the Fire, maybe I can actually beat. Like, you just end up falling into a little bit of a rabbit hole when it comes to materia, once you really get into the system.
It's cool how like you can customize your party how you want. It does suffer from that same problem that many of the other Final Fantasies with customizable parties has, and that means that like at early levels, when you have less skills, you do sort of like designate a healer. When everyone sort of levels up a bit, everyone's the healer. you know.
Aerith was our healer, wasn't she?
Well, she is like statistically the healer. In terms of her abilities. If I remember correctly, her early limit break is Resurrection, which you can bring everyone back to life.
Yeah.
So anyway, this is where we find out about black materia. And this is important because, you know, up until this point, you've been messing about materia. Different materia types are different colours, aren't they? You have the red materia, which is like the elements. I can't remember the others. I want to say
red was summon. Green was the elements.
Oh, wow. There we go. Very good.
And blue, I think, was support materia.
Where you had all, or was that grey? I can't remember.
Well, it might have been silvery white,
something like that. It wasn't white. It definitely wasn't white. I know that.
And the yellow ones were as well, weren't they?
Oh, yeah, there were yellow ones. I can't remember what they were.
But each group into different types. Yeah.
My point is that black materia separates it from all the colours because this, like, you're probably like 10, 15 hours into the game at this point. You've been using materia, you know what the colours are, but you don't know what black materia is. And black is a very distinct colour, anti-colour. That's already setting up, like, you know, intrigue in your mind. And this is also, yes, black and dark and evil. Yeah. Regardless, this is where Kate Sif joins, who's like a cat who's like controlling a fucking robotic, giant, weird Mog, which are like cats as well. And we find out this Kate Sif character is actually controlled by Reeve of Shinra and used to spy on the group. So, anyway, the story continues. The characters go through Cosmo Canyon. Cosmo Canyon is actually Red 13's home. And this is where we meet the character of Bugenhagen. Do you remember Bugenhagen?
He was like the wizard guy that was sat on a ball or something, right?
Or he just didn't have legs. And that's how they drew him. You know, he was a ball. Yeah, sage, like, wizard-type character whose primary role basically is to expose exposition.
Almost an Obi-Wan in some regard.
Yeah. Fortunately, though, in Cosmo Canyon, there's that really heartwarming story about Red 13 finding out that his father wasn't a failure, which I always thought was really good and well done. But anyway, what is important here, though, is that the world building that happens when Bugenhagen gives, the main characters a little history lesson about the life stream. And that is the life stream is like an energy that runs through the planet in cycles. It's basically, I suppose, in terms of looking at it, it's like the sentient representation of the planet. It's like you view it as like energy waves, energy lines just flying around and whatnot, sort of representing that Gaia element. So yeah, the live stream is sort of like representative of all life on the planet as well. It sort of holds memories, the souls, each new life that's born on the planet sort of.
Well, it goes from the live stream and then goes back to the live stream when it's done, doesn't it? And
exactly.
Experiences with it.
Exactly. This is important as well. So anyway, the characters continue on their globe-trotting, video gamey sequence of events until they traverse Nibelheim, full circle. This is very important, obviously, because of the memories associated with it. Cloud's memories suggest that, as he foretold, or told earlier on, after the sequence of events with Sephiroth, the town was burned down. And then when they get there, it's all there. People are living there, and everyone's acting a bit strange. It's a bit weird, isn't it? A bit kooky, a bit strange, a bit odd. Everyone's like, what? What are you talking about? No, the people are oblivious, let's say, to what's happened. And then they find Sephiroth again in the Shinra mansion. Again, Sephiroth has no memory of Cloud. And oddly enough, Sephiroth asks Cloud if he's going to the reunion, which is an important piece of foreshadowing. Cloud doesn't know what it is. Sephiroth says that Jenova will be there. And this is also where we find the optional side character, Vincent, who we're going to skip for the sake of this explanation. He has some ties to Shinra, some ties to Sephiroth, ties to Sephiroth's mother, Lucretia. Anyway, the story continues. To this, we go to Rocket Town, and where we meet Sid, the pilot, blah, blah, blah. Whatever, we're skipping that. More importantly, we next come across the Temple of the Ancients. And this is where the story starts to heat up. This is where the group acquired the keystone to the Temple of the Ancients, but it's stolen by Kate Sith, who screws them over and gives it to Shinra. The group they pursue Sephiroth to the Temple of the Ancients, and this is here where Sephiroth reveals his plan to use black materia to cast Meteor. And he's going to use Meteor to crack a hole in the planet. And then when the planet uses its spirit energy life stream to heal itself, he's going to be there in the middle of it, absorbing it in an attempt to become God. Which is...
It's wishy-washy, but we'll let it slide for now.
Yeah, you don't need to get to the technical details in the end. I think you sort of have to...
But at the end of the day, he's a threat. That's the world. That's kind of what they're building for, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like, he is, like, part of Jenova, and Jenova is, like, antimatter, isn't it, really? That's the thing you need to remember.
Like anti-life or something.
Anti-life, yes, exactly. So I think that's kind of how you need to look at it, is that he is empowered by this anti-life alien creature. But again, Cloud has another mental episode, starts to black out, starts to go a bit weird.
Yeah, they become very common after a while, don't they?
They do, important. And the team also reacquire the black materia after Kate Sith sacrifices himself in an act of repentance. But then Sephiroth manipulates Cloud anyway into handing him the black materia. Some important themes are starting to build here, Mark. As always, I like to refer back to the Hero of 1,000 Faces. And we are seeing like the germination of the antagonist versus the protagonist, isn't it? A great antagonist must be able to test the protagonist, essentially be an anti-protagonist, not an anti-hero, an anti-protagonist, a part in the narrative, a character that essentially poses the greatest threat to the protagonist. And what I like about this relationship between Cloud and Sephiroth is that Sephiroth poses a threat not just physically to Cloud, but mentally, emotionally, because he's literally controlling him,
Yeah. And also it is, as you say, it's highlighting things to come. That there is something to this, and when the fact that he's got that ability to take control of him, that it's not something he's ever used on anyone else.
Exactly.
It kind of establishes there's a relationship between these two that you're not fully party to yet.
I mean, you know that Cloud is a soldier, which are genetically engineered, warriors like Cloud. So you know that he is similar. And then there's that foreshadowing when they go to Mount Nebel and they see the genetically engineered creatures, and Sephiroth was like, "Is that me?" And you can kind of think to yourself, "Well, what about Cloud? What is Cloud to this?"
Yeah, how does he fit into this equation? Yeah.
Yes. So anyway, Cloud has a vision of Aerith going to stop Sephiroth alone, which she does. Despite worrying about his ability to stand up to Sephiroth, Cloud follows. Again, this is great storytelling. In terms of like Freytag's pyramid, we've climbed several. We've gone up a couple, come down a couple. We're up and down all the time. The protagonist, Cloud, is facing great conflict. And he must overcome this great conflict to face the antagonist. I do like that it's not even about physical strength, but mental and emotional strength, actual force of will, which is very important. Sephiroth literally he has complete control over Cloud. And in effect, his ego, his will, his sense of self, his sense of self-importance. So anyway, they go through the Forgotten City, and we're about to come across probably the most iconic moment of the entire series. 16 games later,
Oh, it's brutal.
It's brutal. But there's an interesting little thing that happens here, though. They find Aerith praying, don't they?
Yeah.
And you don't find out what she's doing or why she came until much later on. And again, Cloud is manipulated by Sephiroth, and he almost kills Aerith. Almost, but he stops himself. He actually manages to regain control. This is actually like a pivotal moment, because this is the first time that he manages to wrestle control back. It's his first moment of growth. And then just when you think he's got the upper hand, Sephiroth appears anyway. And...
he descends like a fucking avenging angel from the ceiling.
Yeah.
That scene is burned into my mind.
Yeah, everyone's mind, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's iconic. It's incredibly iconic. It's that moment where he just drops out of nowhere, and then his giant sword just goes straight through Aerith, and it's the most famous death in video game history. Bar none. It's just,
I swear, man, that song.
Yes.
I mean, that song
Aerith's
would mean as much to me if it wasn't for that scene, because it's all about the melancholy and the sadness that's attached to that scene. Yeah.
Yes. It's a massive shock, because to say we think Cloud has won, don't we? It's a massive gut punch.
Yeah.
And what is also interesting is that this also represents the complete loss of a character. As we discussed in our anecdotes earlier on, we didn't really bother with Aerith too much, did we? Because we were like Tifa. We were Team Tifa, let's say.
Yeah.
But there were people out there who did bother with Aerith, and they leveled her up loads and used her in the party the whole time. And this is before, like, JRPGs spread XP. In this game, you had to level up everyone individually.
You had to actually be in the fight to get the XP.
Yeah, that's right. So you can imagine, like, by chance you just use Cloud,
Tifa, Barrett. Yeah, that was it.
Well, exactly. But imagine using Cloud, Aerith, and Barrett. And then like using Aerith, and then your team is completely fucking lopsided.
But the thing is, because also at this point, Aerith would have essentially been, she would have lent into being the healer of the team.
Yes.
And you've suddenly lost what is essentially the heart of the team in that regard, in terms of the
literally, not just in terms of her role, but also her personality as well. Isn't she? She's the empath of the team, isn't she? She's the one that cares, as we stated earlier on. She's the one that senses something about Cloud, tries to reach him. There's a lot of connotations you can take from this. It's very risky play, in my opinion. Because I can't remember who it was, but someone, might have been Jamie Willard, who knows if he's listening. Don't know if I remember him. But I think he might have been the one who told me that he actually leveled up Aerith and then lost her. But interesting as well, we have this is where the white materia first appears. It falls from Sephiroth. Then Cloud is berating Sephiroth. He's angry. Interestingly enough, Sephiroth, who it is revealed is a piece of Jenova at this point, tells Cloud that he himself is a puppet and has no feelings. Because you are a puppet, he says to him, it's given him. That exact line is given even more importance because it's repeated, isn't it, on a black screen. All you see is because you are a puppet in quotation marks. What is Cloud? Who is he? Is he a puppet of Sephiroth? Does he have an origin? Does he have a past? These questions are all really important to his growth. And then, of course, we have the even the next heartbreaking scene, which is where Aerith is buried. And of course, as you mentioned, Aerith's theme, Cloud lets her body drift, in the water, and we get that. Probably one of the most famous pieces of music in video game history as well. Definitely up there. But despite the fact that Cloud is questioning himself even more, he does vow to continue the quest, doesn't he?
Yeah.
And they chase Sephiroth over to the Great Northern Crater. And this is where Cloud finds more Sephiroth clones. They're dying, talking about, reunions and stuff. Rufus, now fully in charge of Shinra, appears, and they think that the Promised Land is inside the crater. In the ongoing struggle leads to the heroes retrieving black materia from a Sephiroth clone. And then, we get loads of, let's say, wishy-washy weirdness happening as Sephiroth brings Cloud into an illusion. And we at last uncover the mystery around Nibelheim and that day that happened 5 years ago. So this is where it gets quite complex, isn't it?
You start to realise that people aren't necessarily the people they thought they were. Not that you thought they were, but what they thought they were.
and you, the player, as well. They're like red herrings almost, aren't they, often? It's interesting. It's interesting. So, I love the use of perspective in this concept that regarding outward appearances, Cloud did not actually go to Nibelheim that day with Sephiroth on that mission.
No.
Sephiroth claims. Tifa is unsure. In the flashbacks, suddenly, instead of Cloud, you're witnessing another character there who you've never seen before with black hair, who looks similar, dressed like Cloud, with a Buster Sword. Sephiroth even shows a picture of the party, and it's Tifa, Sephiroth, this strange character, no Cloud. What's going on?
Yeah.
Sephiroth contends that Cloud is a failed experiment, a Sephiroth clone made entirely of Jenova cells by Hojo. This is a weird play, I think, with the narrative. Because it's not strictly true.
No. But it's meant to fuck with your motivations, and I'm trying to work out what it is.
Is it, though? That's why I find myself asking, is it, though? Is it because Sephiroth is completely insane? Or not?
I feel that insanity wouldn't... if he's insane, he wouldn't care. It's difficult. It's almost
That's what he says to Cloud, though. You're just a puppet. You don't have emotions. He says, I have no need for emotions as well.
He's almost like drawing a parallel between the two of them.
Which is important as well, which is a very important aspect of the story. But what is said here is that Cloud, the personality, is fake. It's created by Jenova cells by being near Tifa. And, Jenova is, of course, psychic. And Cloud is in absolute disbelief.
He was created at that train station when she first approached him in Midgar.
Technically, that's what they're saying, yeah.
Yeah, that's what's being implied, yeah.
So, again, Sephiroth has the psychological advantage over Cloud. While the game has lots of fighting, and we get to see Sephiroth's great physical power, it really is, Sephiroth's hold over Cloud. The threat comes from inside Cloud's head more than anything else. So, very interesting. It's very, very interesting. Furthermore, Hojo reveals his reunion theory, doesn't he? It's the whole concept of the reunion is that all these Sephiroth clones, which have parts of Jenova in them, through the biological engineering that Hojo performed, all these separate parts of Jenova are all sort of being called to the center, to Jenova, to Sephiroth's body, let's say, his main body, where he really is. And that Sephiroth is controlling these clones and leading these clones to him, including Cloud, which is quite horrific when you think about it, isn't it? Because he's talking about getting there and doing this and doing that all the way through the game. You, the player, are following Cloud's plan, aren't you? Really. Cloud says, we're going to do this, so you make Cloud do it. You, the player, don't necessarily have agency over what Cloud's doing. You could do, but then the game would never continue. You have to, in the end, fulfill Cloud's wishes. And I kind of like that idea that, the player and Cloud are both sort of drawn to Sephiroth. Oh, anyway, under Cloud's control, under Sephiroth's control again, Cloud gives the black materia to Sephiroth, gives the black materia to Sephiroth's original body, which is sort of in a state of suspended Mako animation. And then we have the reveal of the weapons. I love this concept. I remember being like really blown away by it. Do you remember, Mark?
Oh, of course, man. I mean, as I say, is it because you get the weapon that comes out of the crate, but there's two others in the game.
That's right. There's actually four others. I can't remember the name of the first weapon, but you have Ultimate Weapon, Emerald Weapon, and Ruby Weapon, and this first one. This first weapon is like the main one.
Yeah, that's the one that actually assaults Midgar. Oh, yeah.
Both later on. But yeah, I love this concept that like the planet is in fear and of Sephiroth. What has just happened is so catastrophic that the planet actually reacts and activates these these kaiju like monsters to like defend itself. And it's kind of like video game padding in the grand scheme of things, but like the first weapon is a giant silver creature puts a shield over the crater where Sephiroth's original body resides. But anyway, the team escapes without Cloud, it turns out. We get a little flashback here where Tifa remembers finding Cloud at the Sector 7 railway, which you were alluding to a minute ago, which happens happens moments before the mission, the opening bombing mission at the beginning of the game. And Tifa sort of suggests that Cloud's memories were completely fucked. And he remembers things about his life that he should do, and he remembers things about a life that he shouldn't do. Again, this is very, very important. So anyway, stuff happens. Days later, Tifa awakens to find that Meteor is coming. It's coming for the planet in the sky. And she and Barrett are prisoners of Rufus Shinra, and then Rufus plans to execute them. A propaganda strike, shall we say, to blame them for Sephiroth's actions. And then just as Tifa's about to be executed, Weapon attacks Shinra. They're distracted. Kate Sith rescues the group, a new version of Kate Sith, and then, they get out. One thing I really like about this sequence, though, is that this place is Junon, isn't it? Is shown earlier in the story as being like a coastal town, but it's got like a giant cannon, a Mako cannon that uses the magic of the world to fire.
Is that where you had to do the military parade and everything?
This is where the military parade happens earlier on in the narrative.
I remember that.
Yeah,
God, I could not get the fucking steps right on that one. Yeah, to do it, I'd stay in time and just to pass the challenge. Like, what the actual fuck? It's hilarious, but what?
It's very silly. As I said earlier on, there's a lot of narrative dissonance in this game. There's a lot the tone is all over the place, which I kind of like it. I kind of like the fact.
One thing I will say at this point in the story now, having had the meteor now appear in the sky, and it's actually visible, you actually start to understand what the icon is over the title on the main cover.
Yes.
Because up until that point, you've got this image
that
you can look at, but you can't quite ascertain what it looks like.
Yes.
Until you realise it's a meteor with its tail fragmenting off behind it.
Yes.
When it finally appears in the game, and I always thought that's really cool as well.
For context, the concept of the Final Fantasy logo is that the logo is the words Final Fantasy and the number, and then you sort of have an image that represents the game as a whole. Don't you? So, yeah, I also like the fact that the world map changes after this point as well. So you're and the music, if I remember correctly, as well. So you're always remembered. You're always reminded of what's going to happen. But something I really like about this sequence where Weapon attacks Junon and Rufus fires the Junon Grand Mako cannon is that it doesn't actually stop Weapon at all. I love the idea that the technology of Shinra, even using the power of nature, is still not enough to stop the planet's defenses.
Oh, it's got that classic anime trope of the billowing smoke.
Yeah.
And then it just walks through it. And
yeah.
You're fucked now. So
yeah. So next we find the characters in the town of Midil, and this is where we find Cloud, as after the events previously when he gave up the black materia, he fell into the life stream, and washes up. He is now suffering from what is known as Mako poisoning and is basically physically and mentally disabled in a wheelchair.
Yeah, totally catatonic.
Yes. It's quite shocking, to be honest with you. And Tifa vows to take care of him, to be his carer, which is...
It's endearing, but at the same time, like, you're thinking, no, this ain't the end.
It's endearing, but at the same time, I think to myself, girl, like, shit's hitting the
You've
fan.
known this guy for 2 weeks.
Yeah, kind of, yeah, as well. Technically speaking, you have. But I suppose, like, when you look at the narrative overall, like, you're supposed to... They have been through stuff together, but, like, shit's hitting the fan. And she was, like, working with, like, Barra in Avalanche.
Yeah.
You know, before Cloud turned up.
Yeah,
and
we
now
were kind of saving the world. Yeah.
Yeah, you know, you're going to drop everything for him, you know? But at the same time, though, has a Final Fantasy protagonist actually gone through as much as Cloud? Ever?
No.
You know?
I mean, you've got characters that have gone through the angst a little bit with the likes of Squall and stuff like that.
But I can't actually say that he suffers the same level.
No, it's not trauma, it's angst.
Yeah.
There's a subtle difference.
Yeah, he's a teenage emo boy.
Yeah.
You know, with weird amnesia. You know, like...
Cloud has literally had every concept of himself torn apart to the point where, who are you? And he's like, I don't fucking know anymore.
By the person that murdered everyone in his village.
Exactly.
You know,
I think this guy gets a pass on this one. It's like, he got fucked up a little bit by this.
Yeah. But, you know, I like this moment, though, because we're at the bottom of... are we at the top? I don't know. What would you say? Would you say this is the top or the bottom of an arc in Freytag's pyramid cycle?
I'd say this is the bottom.
It's the bottom,
because
isn't
it's
it?
the part where you've got to start climbing back up again.
Exactly. And there's no way the story's going to end here.
No.
But the story continues without Cloud for quite a while. Shinra hatches this plan where they're going to move the Mako Cannon to Midgar, and they're going to harness huge materia, read Deus Ex Machina, whatever, and basically like power an even bigger weapon. And the heroes have to do a little globe-trotting video game sequence and fight Shinra across the world and stop them from building this like giant cannon and whatever. And kind of works, kind of doesn't, whatever. What is important though is that we do eventually find out the truth. Because behind Cloud's situation, because Ultimate Weapon, for some reason, one of the planet's defensive kaiju, attacks Medea where Cloud is, and Cloud and Tifa fall into the live stream.
I just want to say, as a short aside, at the time when we were playing this game, and the ground fractured, and we saw Cloud and Tifa actually fall into the live stream, you and I found that moment fucking hilarious.
Did we?
It's something about just the blank look of Cloud as Tifa's kind of like falling down, whilst Cloud just kind of just like vacantly like falls. It was just so
oblivious.
Yeah, it was just so strangely like, okay.
We were horrible teenagers. We were horrible. We like bullied Aerith all the way through this game.
Yeah,
she was
every
alive.
negative option when it comes to conversation.
And we didn't care when she died either, because we were like,
fuck yeah,
fuck you. We were just like so like pro Tifa the whole way through.
Yeah.
How bad is that? My mind's changed. I tell you what, quite a bit over the years.
I've grown to appreciate Aerith.
Yeah. But anyway, so to talk about the truth. It turns out that Cloud actually was in Nibelheim during Sephiroth's mission, where Tifa was the guide and Zack was there. It's just that he wasn't there in person. He was actually a grunt for Shinra in uniform. And due to his embarrassment, because earlier on in the story, he vows to protect Tifa. He stays silent when Tifa appears and never reveals himself. And Tifa, therefore, never realizes he was even there. And this is why he remembers seeing everything and why Tifa does not remember him. So it's revealed that Cloud was actually from Nibelheim, but actually wasn't that close friends with Tifa. Do you remember this?
Yeah, that you saw that shot of her looking out of a window and him just running down a street.
Yes.
But that was literally it. They never really had any sort of commonality.
No, he was like a distant loner obsessing over her as a young child, to be honest with you, when you look at it like that, if you want to be dark about it. But really, yeah, he was just like probably a socially awkward boy who struggled to talk to people. And as was previously mentioned, you know, he vows to protect Tifa due to his personal inhibitions. You know, I like the fact that it turns out that Cloud did actually save Tifa. You know, and she doesn't even know it.
Yeah,
you know,
because she was unconscious at this point, wasn't she?
Yeah, the sequence where he he finds her body. Zack has been killed. You know, and he throws Sephiroth.
Had Zack been killed by that point?
He's on the way out, if I remember correctly.
Yeah,
he's on the way out because he has to have that conversation with him
in the back of the truck. Yeah.
Yeah, where Zack gives Cloud his uniform and Buster Sword, which is sort of like symbolic of like Cloud taking on Zack's personality, because from this point on, he sort of merges his own memories, with Zack's, and sort of creates this like
gesto.
Of himself. It's really interesting. He basically,
he becomes the hero he thinks he wants to be.
Exactly. And I think like this is really representative of Cloud's inner turmoil as a protagonist. We learn that he's actually like, this contradicts something later on, but we learn that actually he was weak as a boy, you know, and he failed to become a great warrior like he wanted to be, you know, and was embarrassed by the fact, you know, and then on that mission when everyone he knows is murdered by Tifa and his family by this monster Sephiroth, he then nearly kills himself to kill Sephiroth, literally through a matter of will, isn't it? Where he's stabbed through the chest himself by Sephiroth's sword, and he throws Sephiroth into the chasm through pure will. You know, like I like to feel like there are like law reasons for this happening, but I like to feel like Cloud is sort of suffering like PTSD almost for it all, and sort of constructs a persona to hide away all the pain that he suffered during this sequence of events.
Yeah, he creates a hero and becomes that hero because the hero could handle it.
Yeah. I think this is also interesting because we learn earlier on in the story, or at some point in the story, that Aerith was Zack's girlfriend. And this is like why Aerith is drawn to Cloud. But not just that, I think it's also because she is someone with great empathetic power. She's, you know, etc. She has powers. She detects something in Cloud, doesn't she? Which is why she wants to reach him. And I think that's sort of metaphorical, isn't it? She wants to reach through Cloud's facade and find the real Cloud inside.
Yeah.
Which is, you know,
sorry for the fact he's wearing her boyfriend's uniform and carrying his weapon.
that's not mentioned really, is it? That's not really brought up. Like, she should really say that, really. Like, my boyfriend was wearing that.
Yeah, that sword is so familiar.
but well,
you gloss over these things.
You do have to, really. It's 1997 Japanese video game storytelling in the end.
Yeah.
But what it is also explained through the lore of the game is that Cloud was experimented on and merged with Jenova Sephiroth cells by Hojo. And often what happened to people when they were experimented on is that they became Sephiroth clones. And Cloud did not. Because of the strength of his will, he did not succumb to the transformation. Physically, at least. This is why he is referred to as a failed experiment. Because he was not turned into a Sephiroth clone for Hojo's, you know, envisioned army. Which is interesting. It's very interesting. This is why his brain is scrambled. And why his memories are fucked. And why when he meets Tifa at that train station, he's like a blank slate absorbing his surroundings. And it sort of all mishmashes into one, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's interesting. I like the character storytelling behind Cloud here because, you know, at the beginning of the game, he's that nonchalant, cool, you know, I don't really care about the paycheck, you know.
Anti-hero.
Anti-hero, let's say, yeah. And then bit by bit, he's psychologically broken by the events, by the antagonist, and, you know, forced to, like, turn on his friends and whatever and make things worse over and over and over and over again. And he has to sort of overcome this multiple times. He has to overcome this psychological weakness that he is suffering. But he also has to overcome the psychological weakness that he has inside. He needs to sort of accept himself and grow from his inhibitions, his fears of being weak. Because that's what begins it all, isn't it? At the beginning, he doesn't want to be weak, so he goes off to Shinra to become a soldier. And then he fails. And he hides, and yet still he manages through will and accident to be a hero and save Tifa, even though everyone else is killed. Which it's an admirable arc, if you ask me. So, while in the narrative, it talks about evil and will, which are like universal traits, aren't they? I feel like the layers behind these traits are dense enough to make them relatable to many of us. I think a lot of us can sort of find appeal in this story, and I think it's told well enough in the game that it's quite understandable. I think this is one of the reasons why this game has actually endured for so long. There's that joke about every Final Fantasy being your first one, and while like every single Final Fantasy protagonist, maybe the first couple, have their own like. I've not played 15 and I've not played 16, so I can't really say. But I do actually think that Cloud might have the strongest one at this point. I really do think
that I've seen. So
yeah. But the story sort of starts to reach its climax at this point, because this is where Cloud asserts himself, doesn't he? And he just says it doesn't really matter what happened in the past. What we have is now. And I am who I am right now. And I'm choosing to be me, and we need to basically kick Sephiroth's ass. In as many words. So, Bugenhagen reveals that the only thing that can stop black materia / meteor is white materia / holy. And that it was Aerith who was trying to summon holy with her prayers the moment that she died. Which also has like a great effect on the narrative overall, because this is where the team decide to finish what Aerith started. And while Aerith has left a great hole in the characters' hearts, let's say, maybe your heart as well, if you liked her, because we didn't at the time, but she does. She leaves a hole, and I like the idea that Cloud says that we're going to do this for Aerith, and we're going to do this with her we're going to do it with Aerith in our hearts. And it's almost like, Aerith is the only one who can stop Meteor. Like, the team can't stop Meteor. They don't have the power in them. They're not Cetra. They can't summon Holy. All they can do is open the way for Meteor, so to speak, which is when Bugenhagen says that Sephiroth must be fully destroyed in order for Holy to, be able to save them, which I think is thin plotting overall, to be honest with you. We must kill the thing so the thing can happen, but it's fine, it's fine. So yeah, this is the sequence where Shinra then moves the Junon cannon and they fire it on the energy barrier that is protecting or hiding or stopping anyone get to Sephiroth in the Great Northern Cave, which was set up by the weapon, which is when the weapon then goes after the cannon. And this is really important, Mark, because it's pretty clear that Rufus is killed by weapon, right?
Yeah.
Remember this. Remember this, yeah? Remember this. Stuff happens, Hojo is killed, blah, 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 blah. So, we're at the final moment. The Great Northern Cave is open. Cloud and his team enter. You fight the final boss. You defeat Sephiroth. But there's something really interesting about this final boss fight that I've always liked. So, do you remember you fight like Sephiroth in like two forms, don't you?
Mm-hmm.
And with the great music.
And One-Winged Angel, wasn't it?
One-Winged Angel, that's right. And then as a party, you fight them. And you defeat Sephiroth. But then for some reason, after this, you get this sequence where Cloud is sort of traversing through this black space.
Yeah, he's kind of like rocketing like a meteor in his own right, descending down towards where
Sephiroth is.
good. And I always got the impression. I don't know if you've got a theory. I'll let you say what you think you're going to say first. But
here's what's interesting is that when you fight Sephiroth before this happens as a team, you fight like a monstrous Sephiroth. He's like some weird, fucked up, one-winged angel Jenova combination, isn't he? That summons fucking Meteor at you in the fight, and then suddenly the final part of the fight, which you cannot lose, is just Cloud v Sephiroth 1v1. And you get to activate Cloud's Omnislash, his final limit break, don't you?
Yeah.
And this has actually been, like, this game overall has been very influential to me. And this has actually always been a very influential moment for me personally as well. For me, this sequence is the moment when Cloud overcomes his personal demons. And his personal demon being Sephiroth. It's metaphorical.
Real life. Yeah.
It's metaphorical.
That's how I always felt about it, because it always felt strangely detached from the other fight.
Yeah. Again, this is really important because we'll be bringing this up later in Advent Children. And, you know, I love this. Sometimes Japanese storytelling can be quite heavy-handed with its imagery and symbolism. I quote, the wolf in Advent Children is dumb as fuck. Anyway, in other things. I like that we get to kill Sephiroth as a team in a true boss fight. And then, like, as a reward, we get Cloud being able to finally finish him off. You know, he's over Sephiroth now. It's great. It's great. But regardless, Meteor continues to plummet. The group watch and hope that Holy will be able to save them. Holy, this giant, you know, energy, attempts to stop Meteor, but it's not enough. And everyone thinks they're going to die. And then the live stream appears and combines itself with Holy and saves the day. I kind of like this idea. I kind of like it. You know, it's almost like the planet is deeming humanity worthy, even though it's saving
effort sort of thing.
Yeah, it's. I mean, it is effectively saving itself. To be fair, you know, let's put it in black and white. But at the same time, it did summon the weapons to kill and stop and do this, and I like it. And it's at this moment where you get a vision of Aerith again, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's the same sort of vision you get of Aerith at the beginning of the game. She, like, bookends the game, fully stating her importance as, like, the second most important character in the game, I would probably say. Maybe even the true protagonist. I'll talk you through that theory of mine in a bit. So, and then we get the ending, which is 500 years later. We get Red 13 with his offspring running through the fields, and they go to Midgar, and it's covered in vegetation. Mark, do you remember your reaction to this ending back in 1997?
Yeah.
What was it?
It was almost... I mean, essentially the story's over. But at the same time, you almost feel something like unfulfilled.
Yes.
It ends so abruptly. Because you had the sequence with Sid pulling the lever in High Wind and them escaping from the crater and everything like that. Then it pretty much almost smash cuts to 500 years later. With no kind of, like, you don't get to see any sort of follow-up. You don't get to see them even appreciating their victory. It always felt very abrupt to me.
I'm with you there. But I kind of enjoy the symbolism, though, now when I look at it. Because
500 years later, it didn't even matter.
No. Because one thing I alluded to earlier on is that Shinra is the villain of the story. Let's say one of the villains of the story. I would say the secondary villain of the story. Jenova, in my opinion, is the main villain.
Yeah.
And basically, like, how these characters are sort of drawn together is through a series of events caused by Shinra. In essence, Shinra is like a blight on the world like Jenova was. And Shinra even goes as far as using the planet's energy into a weapon to protect itself, to try and fight the planet's weapons. And I think that the imagery of nature, because they find Midgar overgrown by forestation, the image of Midgar, this once, you know, dystopian environment where Shinra ruled with an iron fist, it being overrun with natural forestation as being like, emblematic of the character's victory. Because really the prize was the planet, wasn't it? This is a global problem. This is not like a Saturday morning cartoon, everyone goes home happy. This is the entire planet was nearly destroyed. Everyone was nearly killed. And while I agree with you, and I felt the same at the time, that I wish I got more of the characters. We did get more of the characters, obviously, later on, with the ongoing rape and pillage of this story by Square. Rape and pillaging of this story by Square. The true important part of the ending, I think, is told here. And it's elegant. I can see it's elegant. It represents nature overcoming corporate evil.
Yeah. Reclaiming it and,
Yeah, I like it. I like it. So, a quick fire discussion with you, Mark. Have you got... Basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to just mention something. If you haven't got anything to say, I'll just cut it. So, do you have anything to say about Cloud at this point? Because I've said plenty about him at this point.
Well, I mentioned this to you before. The fact is, I actually see a lot in Cloud as paralleling with another character from a major game franchise.
All right, okay.
Once going back and rewatching this, like the retrospectives and everything, just getting a bit of an appreciation for Cloud in a bubble and just seeing the entire story compressed down into an hour, I actually started to see a lot of similarities between Cloud and Raiden.
What, in Metal Gear Solid?
Yeah. In terms of a character that's suffering from deep post-traumatic stress disorder.
Yes.
Who is attempting to be someone else.
Oh, God. Oh, to be honest with you, dude, we're going to do Metal Gear Solid one day. I'd love to do a Metal Gear Solid episode. So I'm a bit flaky with the story, actually, on Metal Gear Solid 2, especially. But now you mention it, I do remember that, because there's that whole story about him being a murderer, right?
Yeah.
As a kid.
And having this whole kind of like backstory that's kind of twisted him up. And at first, when Metal Gear Solid 2, he is meant to be Snake, or you're implied to be the Snake, or the new Snake, or
yes.
And he's living up to an ideal of someone prior to him.
Yes.
And I see a lot of that sort of similarity in this as well. The idea of wanting to be more than who you are.
Yeah.
And I don't know. Once you see that sometimes it is interesting to have such a flawed character. Flawed characters are far more interesting than the stoic.
100%.
Yeah.
100%. The thing is, like, let's say, like, the protagonist with the horrific past who has created a fabrication of himself to ignore it and he pretends to be someone else. This is a tried and tested trope.
Yep.
Storytelling. It's everywhere. Whatever. Fine. But it's exceptionally well done here.
Yeah.
Exceptionally well
because
done
the story has so long to let the story breathe.
Of course, yeah.
It feeds you bit by bit that what you know about him isn't the case. It slowly peels it off layer by layer until it exposes him as a true, flawed human who just wanted to be stronger than he was.
Yes.
Which I think we can all relate to that on some level. So.
Yeah, they do a great job of like creating, they do a great job with rearranging the narrative to enhance the mystery as well by drip feeding you the information, bits and bits. It gets weird, doesn't it? Like I said, when they go to Nibelheim and everyone's like, "What are you talking about?"
You start thinking, is this some sort of reality bending situation or a time travel thing? Or you're trying to work it out.
It's just weird. It's almost Lynchian in its weirdness. So, cool. Do you have anything to say about Tifa?
Tifa was a strong female character that was very interesting to play as. She was badass.
I've softened a bit on her, actually. I actually feel like she's a bit of a passenger.
She doesn't have much development in the story.
Yeah. Like, for example, while all this is going on and Cloud's saying all this stuff about her and how he knew her, but she's just sitting there going, that's not true. She doesn't really, like, go, hang on a minute, that's not what happened. Or, you were that weird kid I used to see in the street every now and then.
You feel you could have had a bit more agency in the plot line.
I kind of feel like it, yeah. I kind of feel like it. When, like, Cloud is just, is catatonic and she vows to protect him, as I said, I do feel like it's a bit of a weak character moment for Tifa. It's almost like she chooses... It's not stated that she's in love with Cloud, ever. No. but it's sort of like there is obviously a connection between them for the stuff that happened in the past, and I feel like she feels sorry for him at this point, but at the same time, it kind of weakens her characterization for me a little bit because she was a badass, like environment saving terrorist working with Barrett before this all happened, and she's gonna retire and become a carer for Cloud in his catatonic state. I don't know. I imagine like that was set up so that she could fall into the live stream with him, and then she could go through the experience with him, realizing the truth. So I'm not being like, I love Tifa as a character, but I kind of feel like in this game, the narrative does a bit of a disservice to her. Just now, I never used to think that. It's just like in the last week or so when I've been re-exploring the story, I've sort of
taking a look at the characters and going,
I'm sort of calling on her a little bit, So,
yeah, now you mention it in that sort of capacity, I see where you're coming from.
Yeah. What about Aerith?
Aerith is an interesting one. Another one that, as you say, she's more active than Tifa in the storyline in terms of trying to actively do something. And I feel that you and I did a little bit of a disservice in terms of our initial opinions of her.
Yeah, I do think that. Yeah, I agree.
But it's because she was kind of like the soft healer type initially. At least that's your first impressions of her.
And we named her after your sister.
Yeah. Which, I mean, that just does a lot to any older brother in terms of his empathy towards a computer game character. So,
I don't name characters after my friends anymore, by the way. I just don't do it anymore. Just no. Just don't do it anymore.
Take something away from the reverence of the moment.
Yeah. Ruins it. But, okay, let me put something to you, because I was mentioning earlier on how I feel like Aerith is sort of like a secondary protagonist. So, looking at like the plot threads, there's like 3 main plot threads running through this. So let's look at this, yeah? So, the narrative of Final Fantasy VII occurs like years after a global conflict which happens between the Cetrans, the planet, and Jenova, right? Where they're all the Cetra people are wiped out, right? So that's like the global conflict of the past. The global conflict of the future is between Aerith, who also is representative of the Cetrans and the planet, versus Jenova, and Shinra, which is where I was sort of going with that idea that Shinra is sort of this like a similar concept to Jenova. Jenova is like this anti-life, poisonous entity, and so is Shinra. They're sort of like linked, and this is like the present global conflict. Cloud's conflict with Sephiroth is more of a personal conflict, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's not really global, which is where I was going earlier on with how the struggle of the main cast sort of is secondary to the struggle of Aerith's prayers for Holy. You sort of get the impression her consciousness is sort of still actively praying for Holy in the live stream because of the uses of her face at the beginning and the end. That's sort of the idea that I got. The way they sort of use her as like a voice from the grave in other mediums, nah. Yeah. So, yeah. I kind of feel like she is like the secondary main protagonist in this for me now.
Yeah.
Personally. I like Tifa more, I think, overall as a character, because I like she's like plucky and sparky and fun. And like Aerith is a bit too lame, I suppose, for me personally, but that's just my opinion. But I sort of appreciate her a lot more. So you got anything to say about Sephiroth?
Sephiroth is so edgy he's going to cut himself. It's just so, it's like every single box is ticked on the how cool can we make this guy sort of like thing, to the point where it goes off the edge of the page and you think, okay, you've managed to horseshoe around to almost absurd levels now. I mean, you've got the katana blade that's far too long to be able to withdraw it from its scabbard. You've got the classic animated white hair, and everything about him is just designed to be like all the dials turn to 11 cool, and as far as JRPGs go.
Mm-hmm.
and everything about him, every experience you have with him when they're setting down the groundwork for who he is, just paints him as being this utter god among men in terms of like he is the greatest of us and stuff like that. And I will say that sometimes it was a little bit jarring to suddenly have him like having these emotional conversations about mother.
I was about to say, going from badass to, you know.
But there is something about Sephiroth that has stayed with Final Fantasy fans. He is the one that gets brought up in conversation. He's the one that they want to see in Smash Brothers, and he's the one that they want to see come back. If there was ever a beat 'em up, which I think there was at one point, wasn't there? Was it Iggy's I'm thinking of? Or...
That's right, Iggy's, yeah. God bless the ring.
Yeah.
As they called it, yeah. I'm pretty sure he's the main antagonist still in the Final Fantasy remake series, which I've not played yet. So
because he's the one that characters always loved in terms of their villain. Because he was just so, like, for want of a better term, he was cool. Even if it was pushed to absurd levels at times.
He's become iconic, hasn't he? You know?
Yeah.
But when you look at the plot to Final Fantasy VII, he's not really the main antagonist, is he?
Jenova, isn't it?
Yes, that's my opinion. That's my opinion.
He is merely a side effect of Jenova.
I almost feel like he's a victim. In many ways, Hojo is more of the antagonist because he's responsible.
Of it, yeah,
he actively is responsible for Sephiroth's creation. You know, he's the one that injects Lucretia with the Jenova cells while she's pregnant with him. You know, he's the one that creates him effectively.
I mean, Sephiroth's most of his story is just filled with revelation. Oh my god, revelation! Yeah. Oh my god, and revelation going to wipe them all out.
Yeah. So. Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, he just becomes so disillusionized with existence, doesn't he? He starts to wipe it all out. He just, you know, which is sort of like diverts more in Advent Children, which I kind of like the idea of it, but we'll get onto that in a minute. So, but yeah, so that's Final Fantasy VII. I feel, you know,
it's a milestone in my gaming history.
Definitely.
I mean, I played other Final Fantasies after, and they never got to the level of this game.
For me, 10 was close. Actually,
10 had its moments, but unfortunately, the main character was so goddamn unlikable at times that it really kind of the only thing that kept me on was Auron. Like, he's the fucking daddy.
Well, maybe we'll get to that another day. But yeah, I'm with you there. Yeah, despite its complex nature, the plot of this great story is actually very well told and complete, in my opinion.
Yep.
It never needed more.
But despite that,
well, I reckon we should take a little break here, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about the CGI film sequel, Final Fantasy Advent Children. So I can't wait. Okay, welcome back to the podcast. So, Mark, I just wanted to, as like a footnote, sort of chat quickly about Final Fantasy Advent Children. So, I want to ask you, first of all, what year did this come out?
2005, man.
Thank you, 2005. So, that means I was 23 when this came out. So, it was like 5, 6, 7, 8 years after Final Fantasy VII came out.
Can you believe it as well when you think about it?
Can you remember how you felt leading up to the release of this film? Or what was your interpretation of what was going to happen? Was you excited? Was you nervous?
I was hyped, man.
Yeah.
Thing is, there was that whole, finally, we're going to get an ending that we did at the end of 7.
Yes.
The launch, the release material and all that, the hype, all had images of Sephiroth in it again. And
yes.
It was, you thought, oh, he's back? There's more?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I was hyped, man. I mean, as I say, I was in my early 20s.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah, because obviously the original Final Fantasy movie, The Spirits Within, was a massive failure, and it led to Sakaguchi.
It was so bad, man. It was so goddamn bad.
I didn't think it was absolutely awful, personally. I thought
I
it was
was
okay.
not a fan of Final Fantasy Spirits.
Are you sure you were not a fan because it was not what you wanted?
I don't know what I wanted, but whatever that movie gave me was not what I wanted.
Fair enough. Well, it led to Sakaguchi leaving the company, I believe, in disgrace because it was such a failure.
Yeah, there was nothing to like. It just left zero impression on me. Like the action sequences were meh. In some ways, it felt almost a rip off of Seven, and the whole idea of a rock with an alien life form being launched onto our planet and leaching into our life stream and resulting in monsters and blah.
It had like hallmark Final Fantasy concepts in it, but it wasn't what we wanted. Anyway, fine, whatever. So with Final Fantasy Advent Children, for me, that was it. It was a grand event. Yeah, I remember. I was with Keely at the time, and Keely was a gamer. If you ever listen to this, Keely, hi. And I believe we both played through Final Fantasy VII again together to get prepared for the release of this film, and I can remember just being so excited about it. It was like the biggest event ever, you know.
Well, the idea of a CGI movie being released several years after such a major game, it doesn't happen.
Yeah. No. I mean, video game storytelling has come a long way since Final Fantasy VII came out. It's come a long way since Advent Children has come out. So it's a very different era. You know, this is nearly 20 years. It's nearly 20 years ago.
Yeah.
You know, so, but I can remember being so excited that when it was finally released on DVD in Japan, right, and Keely stayed round, I got up in the middle of the morning, right, to see if it had been put on torrent, and it was on torrent, and I downloaded it overnight, right, and then went back to sleep, set my alarm for 5 in the morning or something, and then got up and watched it without subtitles. I was so excited about it. And I remember, I think by the time I'd watched it and then gone back to bed, and then when me and Keely got up, I told her we had the film, let's watch it, and someone had done subtitles for it. So I watched it again with her, and I downloaded the subtitles. God, this is so long ago. So yeah, it was a great event, a grand event. It was like an incredible, moving, emotional experience, really, to see these characters I'd loved
coming back
so long.
Yeah, you're revisiting them, and they were all there, and
in some shape or form.
Yeah.
So anyway, I'm going to get the bad points out of the way first, because I don't want to end this on a sour note. Cloud, this character was fucking bollocks in this film. I'm sorry, right?
Nah, you're right.
All the progress that he makes in Final Fantasy VII, the video game, is undone in this film because he has to go through it again. Basically.
Yeah, he does seem to have taken a couple of steps back. He's pulled a Robocop, and he's actually rolled himself back just so that he's got more conflict and angst for this movie. You're right.
I can kind of accept that maybe he's suffering from survivor's guilt and he needs forgiving from Aerith, but he didn't have this issue at the end of Final Fantasy VII.
There is a point when his phone is just blowing up after he loses it when it's descending in the water. And you see the sheer amount of people that are reaching out to him. The amount of walls this motherfucker must have put up in order not to.
I want to remind you of the moment when Cloud destroyed Sephiroth in his psyche, in his ego, as a representation of all of the pain and suffering. That was meant
to be a watershed moment for him.
Yeah, pointless. What's the point? My biggest problem with this entire film is that I cannot accept the conflict in this movie whatsoever. I just can't accept it. It doesn't mean anything. It is bollocks.
It's an excuse to get Cloud and Sephiroth fighting again.
Of course it is. It is.
I mean, but you're right. The path which they chose, they could have found a better one. Or at least they could have found a better place for Cloud to be in.
Oh, no, it gets worse. Jenova's head survived? Really?
It's not the only thing that survived, is it?
and it's in a fucking monument, apparently. Of course, Rufus survived, spends the whole fucking film in a wheelchair holding fucking Jenova's head. Oh, God. And the fucking... Oh, the three main villains. They're like Sephiroth clones, aren't they? And they're just like
Oh, like
they're like giant babies. They're just
yeah,
so
they
annoying.
cry. They're meant to be emotionally stunted, and it
Yeah.
just felt very jarring for these badass motherfuckers that are kind of like suplexing motorcycles with their legs.
To go, mommy.
Yeah,
Like,
that
you know,
it was a choice. So there was a mood.
the idea of geostigma, right? Which is like the concept that Sephiroth's consciousness is now poison because obviously he was born with Jenova cells, is sort of like existing in the live stream. Like, it makes sense as a way to tell a story, but I reiterate, it shits on what came before. Like, for the sake of fan service, this film undoes the entire game's hero journey. It's like the fucking Star Wars sequel trilogy. What was the point of Vader's sacrifice if the Emperor is still fucking alive? What's the point? What's the point? There is no point. Why are there more Sephiroth clones? He fucking killed them all. Bollocks. Anyway, I'm done with that now. Good points. Mark.
Okay, so good points. I'm going to be honest. The majority of these good points are just down to awesome sequences of fighting. Like
Yes.
it's just essentially that's what you came here for.
Let's
I will
be honest,
say
Mark,
that
this is a giant fucking CGI music video for Nobuo Uematsu's fucking soundtrack.
let's just hit the quick notes in terms of like badass awesome moments.
Okay.
Firstly, he's got a motorcycle that acts as a scabbard for multiple swords. I thought that was fucking awesome. Like, I will say that one thing I noticed in this movie on rewatching recently is apparently motorcycles don't necessarily need to be facing forwards in order to drive. Half the time, these motorcycles are going fucking sideways. And I get you can drift, but Jesus Christ, there's a sword battle between 3 or 4 separate like characters. The physics has been kicked out the window.
Yeah.
At one point, one of them does a handbrake on his bike, turns it sideways, punches his fist into the road, flexes his body and balances up on one hand and flings his motorcycle using the power of his legs at Cloud, who then responds with the most obvious of resolutions to this conundrum of flipping, turning backwards, backflipping, rotating around to slice the motorcycle in half.
Yeah,
I'm not quite sure how the flip helped, but
it's cool. It looks cool though.
There is a term on TV tropes of what do you mean it's not awesome? And it's a whole thing. There's a whole point of, yeah, the shit you just saw is awesome, but was it necessary? And that could be levied against a great deal of this movie. That there are some awesome sequences in this that are just visually interesting to watch. I love the way in which his swords click together. The idea that he has multiple swords that can be detached and reattached together doesn't do a damn thing. They don't really increase his power or anything like that. It just looks visually awesome.
It makes sense for him to give up Zack's Buster Sword as well.
It becomes a monument outside Midgar, which he actually, after the clones kick it down, he makes a point of setting it back up because it's an icon of his previous life.
Yeah, exactly. That he accepted and moved on from, I reiterate. Anyway, sorry.
There is one scene in this movie that is somewhat soured for me, because it's a sequence where Balmont attacks Midgar, and they're fighting him on the construction site.
Yes.
And it leads up to, at the time, I'd only ever seen this in Advent Children, and it was a phenomenal sequence. Is when Cloud decides, that's it, shit's gone too far, I'm going to fuck this bitch up. and he launches himself into the air, and progressively each one of his team jumps forward and gives him a boost. They grab his hand and they launch him faster and higher.
Yeah.
And it gets to the point where everyone, as he's jumping past him, they're giving him a couple of words of wisdom or encouragement, something to boost him up. And by the time he leaves that construction site at the top of the building, he has got a fucking shockwave traveling around him, the speed they've managed to launch him up to. And Badmont fires that fireball down at him, and he punches through the fireball, and the reflection in his eyes, you see Aerith reaching forwards to give him a final help up. And I will be honest, that moment got me a little bit when I watched it the first time. I was like, oh.
And now?
The problem is I've seen One Piece. And that has the exact, more or less, a similar scene, minus the Aerith ghost help at the end. But that scene from 2002, Alabaster Arc, where Luffy needs to make his way up a tower as fast as possible, and each one of his crew jumps out and gives him a boost, firing higher up this tower to prevent a bomb from going off. And once I saw that, I was like, oh no, One Piece did it first. And it kind of took something away from this scene for me. It's hard to explain.
But it's so good though. Seeing the cast one by one helping him, even though I'm going to get to that in a second.
I mean, even the reflection is like that got me a little bit when I saw the reflection of Aerith. They don't actually show her; they just see in his eyes, and it's kind of that was quite sweet.
Yes.
But another thing this movie did is it made me fucking love Red and Rude.
Oh, they are Red and Rude. Oh, they are the Turks. They are fantastic, really funny.
They were good. They were good in the game, but this movie was their fucking. Yeah, this was their coming out, man. Like I didn't realize how good their relationship was until I saw it in this movie. It's like, you know what? The movie should have been about you two.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
I don't know. They were far more entertaining on screen than Cloud.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
It's because of the interplay between the two of them. It's just brilliant.
This movie is like fucking Alcoholics Anonymous for fucking Cloud. Basically, it's about all the characters telling him it's going to be all right at some point and saying stop being an emo. It's like for fucking emo recovery. Sorry, nothing against emos, but like edgelord.
We all have to grow up sometime.
Yeah, it's like for God's sake. No, you're right. Like seeing the characters on screen together is great. It's great. It is moving. I actually really liked Tifa's redesign, and I actually really liked her like relationship with Cloud. There's like a closeness there that's like sort of beyond friendship that was quite endearing.
Yeah, but it's comrades in arms, isn't it?
Yeah. You kind of get the impression that in alternative universe they could actually be a couple or could love each other.
I think too much has happened, and it's hard to explain that they've moved beyond anything like romance. It's something else now. It's almost like a brotherhood, sisterhood.
Yeah. I like it. I do love that moment though when Kadaj like turns into Sephiroth in that blink you'll miss it moment at the end, because obviously he was going to turn to Sephiroth, and like there's a bit where like. It's just like there's a flash, and suddenly he's Sephiroth, and then
there's a hello Cloud,
something like that. Yeah, it's so awesome. It's so awesome.
And they have this whole interplay about I've got to say you're just a memory, and it's like I'll never be just a memory.
Yeah,
and it is cool. I mean, they are having fight sequences that are destroying the city essentially, in terms of like you have to accept that. You can slice a sword and cut a building in this universe in terms of the physics and everything, and you give it that suspension of disbelief because what do you mean it's not awesome?
Yeah,
and
I don't know. In the end, it's all fucking fan service, but
I still love the way when Barrett first turns up properly on screen and you just see his hand transform into the cannon.
Yeah,
I am knocked out big for that the first time when they all start coming in. Although it does make you realise that a couple of the characters literally have nothing to offer the story.
I think Red 13's got like one line.
Yeah, I mean, Yuffie is there just because. And same for Sid, same for...
Vincent, for some reason, can transform into his cloak.
Yeah, that was a strange sort of like, why the shit did you not pull that out when we were fighting Sephiroth the first time, bitch? But nonetheless, that has that whole sequence where... I will say that you do see kind of allusions to limit breaks. I mean, I don't call them limit breaks or anything. I mean, he literally does a Klim hazard on Baphomet.
He does the fucking Omni Slash on Sephiroth.
Well, it's like a modified Omni Slash because it's kind of the way his sword, like when he flings it forward, it separates into its respective parts. And
his over-designed sword.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, and that was cool as well because it just looked badass the way he landed and all the swords plant down around him and stuff like that. It's just, it is very much a movie that's designed with style over substance. But literally to the point where they traded in all the substance to get more style.
And it's just fan service in the end, like I said. It is, and I haven't played the remake or the new version. Obviously, it's just coming out. Maybe I will one day, and we'll revisit this. I don't know, but we'll see one day.
And it also had that final scene where, right at the end, Cloud sees Aerith walking away with Zack.
Yeah.
And that part did kind of make me happy. It's that in terms of sort of like narrator storyline and all that. The way he kind of looks back at him and there's almost like a "see you later, kid" kind of like moment.
Yeah,
that was really quite nice. Everyone in some place got something of a happy ending.
Yeah, basically we got the happy endings that we wanted from the original ending.
Yeah, I mean, basically. If you'd had the last couple of minutes of this movie at the end of Final Fantasy VII. It would have been a much more satisfying ending.
Like I said, I'm okay with Final Fantasy VII's ending nowadays, but I'm not sure if that's because we've got more. I don't know. I can't say.
You've got perspective and...
Yeah. I don't know if it's because I'm older and I've got more perspective, but also because we got Advent Children. Am I am I more forgiving and more accepting of that ending because I got the character, arcs, endings that we got in Advent Children? I can't say. It's hard to say.
Yeah.
So that was a quick rundown on Advent Children.
Yeah.
So
if you're a fan of Final Fantasy VII, it's worth checking out.
Pretty sure every Final Fantasy VII fan ever's watched it already.
That's probably valid.
So I just wanted to make a little final note, really, because this has been a bit of a pet project, I suppose, of mine. Just wanted to mention the main theme of Final Fantasy VII, the music that you hear on the world map, Cloud's theme. It's actually another one of my all-time favorite pieces of music. Now I know I say that a lot, but there is something about how majestic and thoughtful, and how grand and contemplative and melancholic and moving and heroic it is. That
is that they da 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 da.
Yeah. It's just, it does such a good job of representing the character and the story. Because obviously this piece of music comes out in the game when you first hit the world map, so it sort of emphasizes the discovery, But I was thinking about this today, and Final Fantasy VII is also about self-discovery, isn't it? In the grand scheme of things, about Cloud's self-discovery. Sometimes, as we grow up and we learn and we change, what we find out about ourselves isn't something we necessarily always like. But learning to accept ourselves for who we are is a really important lesson in life in general. And for me, that's kind of what Cloud's journey is all about. Memories, the past, as many self-help books will tell you. Yeah, it's cliched. It's just matter. They're just messages that go through the brain. And in the end, this story really is about the here and the now, isn't it? It's about what's important, and it's about accepting us, who we are, and forgetting the past, isn't it? So I really think that I just love that piece of music, and I love these themes, you could say, about this wonderful, wonderful gift of a game. So
yes.
Did you have anything else to add?
Nah, man. Other than I was thankful that I got to play this the first time around.
Yeah, in '97. Yeah,
it was my first JRPG.
Yeah,
and
it was mine too.
Ruined me for all JRPGs that will follow.
I've played a lot of JRPGs since, and I'm not in that park, actually. I could probably say that maybe, I don't know, I'm not sure.
Now, I played, Breath of Fire, I played Dragon's Quest, and they were good, don't get me wrong, they got some nice mechanics and fun, but nothing ever hit me on the same level as Final Fantasy VII.
Yeah, I'm not sure if... Do you think it's because it was your first one, or do you not think that the narrative's power has something to do with that as well?
Maybe column A, column B on that one, man.
Yeah,
but you never forget your first, do you?
No, you don't. So. Well, anyway, thank you for joining us on this look back on one of my favourite video game stories of all time. I imagine Mark can probably say the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's influenced me as a writer greatly. If it wasn't for Final Fantasy VII, Lord of the Rings, and probably Ocarina of Time, I probably wouldn't even be a writer, dude. I think Final Fantasy VII might have been what kick-started me writing.
The creative juices.
yeah, that's right. And I think, as I mentioned in a previous podcast, then Ocarina of Time and then Lord of the Rings. So, if it wasn't for this game, I probably wouldn't be the person I am today. I can probably imagine that a lot of people can say that about this game. So anyway, for information on the music we've used, please see the episode description. The podcast is finished. You can follow me at writer GM Groves on Twitter /X /Facebook /Instagram. Mark?
You can find me avoiding all future JRPGs because I've had my fill.
You don't have the time.
Nah, man. Predominantly shooters these days.
If you want to read my work, check out the website in the podcast episode description. There you will find articles, reviews, and fiction. So, without further ado, I will bid you farewell, and hopefully we will see you soon.
Catch you later.